Okay, this is episode 64 of Summoning Insight. As always, sponsored by Alpha Draft, a fantasy esports company. Now, what's funny is the word alpha actually reminds me of an interesting anecdote, okay? So there was these guys who were naval intelligence officers. I think it was in like the late 60s or the early 70s. And they actually claimed that they had communication with a UFO that was like transmitting data to them. And the UFO didn't speak to them in English. It just said to them, it spelled out, I think it was in like Morse code or something, or sonar or something. It spelled out the word AFA, not alpha, but AFA, A-F-F-A. And what's interesting is at the time they thought, like, what does that even mean? Like, they had no clue whatsoever. But actually, a guy who was an occultist actually looked it up, and apparently in the Enochian language, which is a language given to the Elizabethan Renaissance magician John Dee and his scrying accompaniment Edward Kelly, apparently in that language, which was communicated hundreds of years earlier in Elizabethan England, that actually means nothing. And so the idea was the alien was actually communicating nothing to the people, but for some reason through some sort of weird, arcane, magical language. So in many ways, when I think of Alpha Draft, if you were to kind of use your scrying eye and be able to kind of discern what might happen in the future and divine the outcomes, then you could win big, actually. You could have a lot of success. If you can sort of conjure up the spirit of the game of League of Legends and understand the way it would flow, you could win a lot of money. But I'm just going to warn you right now, if you fuck around and you don't know what you're doing and you don't know how to interpret the language of the game, you might end up with nothing. So there we go. That's probably one of the most abstract introductions I've ever done. But I got through it, Monty. That's all that matters at the end of the day. You get through it. You keep rolling. So this is Summoning Insight episode 64. I'm Thorin, as usual. And co-host here, Monte Cristo. So in the time between last episode, Monty, good news. You still got your job for next year. So
God bless.
Let's start with that. So what actually is the outcome? The outcome, as far as I can tell, is OGN and you will still cast every game, but somehow half of them will still be cast by Smo TV, but just simultaneously or something?
Okay, so this is a very interesting situation that actually has previously happened in StarCraft 2 at the start of the WCS. So for those of you who don't know, the WCS was basically Blizzard's region-locking local league pseudo LCS implementation of StarCraft 2, where they tried to keep the Koreans in Korea and not from like wrecking local leagues in Europe and NA. Stuff like that. Although it sort of did happen in that first season, but they're trying to set up a better structure for tournaments and leagues around the world for StarCraft 2. But the result of this was that, like, how can I say this? So in the first season of this, there was a split in the broadcast, and the split in the broadcast was between, at the time, GOM TV, which hosts the GSL, and OGN, which hosts the OSL, right, traditionally. So because they wanted to have one sort of league for Korea, the way they ended up dividing this was that there would be 2 seasons of the GSL, 1 season of the OSL, and then OGN received the first season-ending tournament of WCS, which was kind of all the regions from around the world coming to Korea and then competing in a big tournament. So I actually cast the WCS season finals and the OSL and the GSL, actually. But the thing is, both, in a weird twist of fate, both broadcasters were given access to each other's feeds. It was just who was hosting it in terms of the global English language stream. So Doa and I spent like a season sitting in an empty studio just getting feeds from the GSL studio, and Tasteless and Artosis spent a season in an empty studio getting feeds from the OGN studio, but we were both casting in English the same games at the same time.
And wasn't there some wrinkle, like for the final, you both casted English at the same time simultaneous or something bizarre like that?
No, we were casting all games simultaneously.
Okay, so actually people had a choice as to which they watched.
Right, but it wasn't, here's the thing, it wasn't the simultaneous broadcast. The production was done by either, so for example, when the GSL was going on, what would happen is we would get a feed into an empty studio. So Dola and I would sit there and cast StarCraft 2 in an empty studio using the feed from the broadcast over at GOM TV. But we would both be casting the same games.
So here's the cute thing though, Monty. Now here's the problem. At the time, it must have been frustrating for you because if both games were being cast in English, obviously everyone's going to watch Artosis and Tasers.
Of
They're
course.
like the premier
I would
duo.
watch them. They're
Yep.
super good.
But here's the great thing. And meanwhile, the OGN duo, which was you and Doa, not many people were going to be watching that. It wouldn't be as good a product. Now, don't worry, because this time around, the OGN duo is you and Doa, but it's League of Legends, so everyone will be watching you. And whichever unlucky motherfucker who does the other broadcast, I'm guessing they're not going to get that many views.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a chance for them to build their career. Okay, cool. Maybe they can even show they're good. But unfortunately, it's probably not going to be ideal. That's probably the person who loses the most, is whoever has to do that broadcast. Because if in the other scenario, at least they would have gotten half of it in that world. But it's going to be hard for them to go head-to-head with the people who are the community favorites, as you found out yourself in the other scenario.
Yeah, of course. Obviously, you're going to get like a lot lower viewership. And so I think what the result of this is going to be is basically the same situation, right? So there's this scenario where OGN still retained rights to broadcast all the games, broadcast Worlds, broadcast everything like that. But, and that's the caveat, like, even if the studio at OGN is empty and the matches themselves are being held at the Nexon Arena, which is where I assume Spo TV will be holding their matches in Gangnam here in Seoul, we're still going to cast it with their feed. And that's going to be true of the Korean casters as well. So ultimately, I don't really see who's going to watch Spo TV.
Yeah. But here's the thing, though, Monty. A lot of people would say, like, oh, that's a real shame. Like, those people are going to get much viewership and stuff. But you know my feeling on these sorts of things, Monty. I don't give a fuck about the underdog. I like it when the person who's the favorite, who's the best, just crushes other motherfuckers. So I hope they get no viewers. I hope they go home every day, they cry, like, oh, why can't people give me a chance? You're not good enough. Sorry. I mean, I wish you were, but if wishes were horses, then beggars would ride. As a famous woman once said. But they're not. So as a result, beggars don't. Remember, beggars die in the street of alcoholism and poor hygiene. So as a result, I'm not saying I wish that fate upon the people who cast the games for Spo TV, but I imagine it will metaphorically be a similar sort of fate that they will meet. Anyway, moving on from that possibly somber note to the end there.
Wow.
The good news is Monty's still casting all the games. So just keep tuning in to OGN and pretend Spo TV doesn't exist. That'll show Riot. So actually, before we go into tournaments, I've got a connected piece of Riot news I want to ask you about. So there was news that came out that Riot has sold the remaining equity, which I believe was 7% in the company, to Tencent, who already owned 93%. Now, I wasn't aware it was as high as 93%, but apparently that was bought back in like 2011. So long before LCS, the majority of the company was already owned by Tencent. So we knew they already had the controlling interest, etc., etc. Is there any significance to the fact they've bought up the last 7%, Monty? Do you understand this?
I don't really know what their previous arrangement was. I do know that, Riot operates very independently of Tencent, and there's not, like, they pretty much just do their own thing, at least when it comes to every region outside of China. They only recently put an office in Shanghai, so they don't actually have that much pure Riot presence there at this current time. I don't really know what it means for the company. I don't know how much control they had. It's possible that they, even with that 7%, they controlled a lot of the voting shares in their stock. So I really can't know.
As far as I can tell, it sounds like Tencent doesn't actually want to run the Riot Western side. Like, it sounds like they just bought into it because they think it's a business to own, and they still want them to run it. Okay, so that's not a problem. I don't expect this means Tencent now takes over and, like, there's a secret plan.
I don't think so.
But I do have to say one thing, Monty. I got to get one little shot in across the bow. So here's one thing, okay. I understand, actually, why Riot owners would sell a large amount of stock in 2011. Because in 2011... the game was far from a confirmed esports success. That was actually in Season 1 when the first IEMs were going on. They had Season 1 Championship. It was still growing as an esport, and they were having to fund it every step of the way, and it was quite uncertain yet as to which way it would go. It wasn't certain we'd have the LCS and we'd have millions of viewers. That all happened in the years since. So selling at that point is probably a good deal, actually. I bet you get a lot of money because essentially you're selling the potential of it to the guy who's buying it, and you're getting the cash out for quite a lot at that time. If you remember the story of Riot that they obviously like to propagate, which is that they started out as this little studio that just made this game.
They did.
And they licensed
I can tell you, they were a tiny studio. I was in their offices when they had like 60 employees or less in 2009. They were small.
Sure. So my point is, within that amount of time, I can also understand if you get offered millions and you were a small studio, you think, great, this is great. We're still going to get to run the game. We get some money now. It's worked out for everyone. Here's the one part where I have a little bit of a qualm, though, is why would you then sell the last equity in 2015? Because here's my problem. If you really believe League of Legends, the game League of Legends, is going to only get bigger and it's going to grow more as an esport and it's going to become this thing in 10 years that's like a true sport with maybe double, 10 times the viewers, now seems like exactly when it would never make sense to sell your equity, because your equity in that scenario will only be worth more in the future.
Right, the stock. Because like the whole thing is that they want to switch from a method of compensation with their employees where they give out stock options, which stock options are great, but Riot has to go public for those to actually be worth, like, because you can't sell them, right, as long as the company is still held privately. So I think it either shows that they're not planning on going public anytime in the near future, or that they are somewhat not that confident in their own like abilities moving forward.
Well, here's the thing. I agree with them. I don't think they're wrong. I'm just saying I think it's funny in terms of how they would present the expectation. I mean, you remember there was a famous interview. It was done at an event where I think it was at a Gamescom, perhaps, where I saw Waylon, Riot Magus, say that League of Legends would be played in 10 years and would be a sport like the NFL. Something along those lines. One of those sorts of outlandish statements, which obviously just was reflective of a lot of optimism. Now, if people really thought that, I suspect you wouldn't do this move. So I think, and I think they're correct, by the way, that League of Legends is probably as big as it's going to get. Now, it could still get a bit bigger. It could still grow a little bit, but I don't think it's going to experience exponential growth from this point on. I think it's got a pretty good saturation of casual players, and we've already seen that, okay, the numbers go up, but they're not going insanely up anymore. So I think it probably is the right time to cash out in that sense. You've probably gotten to the end of that point of potential.
Yeah, and the other factor is that Riot has not announced another game in 6 years since League of Legends was released. We know that they were working on a card game like Hearthstone because there was a hack and all that was leaked, but they haven't shown an ability to actually create new titles, which is not good, honestly. It's not good. Like 6 years without even an announced follow-up game is a really, really, really long time. And
here's the sort of corollary point to that. Even more worrying is, forget a totally different game. They don't even still have a plan in place for a new engine to keep League of Legends going. So as good as League of Legends looks now, it looks all right compared to modern games. In fact, if you think of the game lasting 5 more years, the engine's going to be so far behind any modern game. And so if they haven't got anything in place yet, like obviously Dota's literally like in the process of like switching engines, etc. Counter-Strike can potentially go to the Source 2 engine that they're building. The notion is, if you really do want, like, I think it's, on one hand, the engine thing is a really good sign from other developers. It means they're saying, right, we're not just going to make a new version of the game and make you switch and change everything. We're going to actually try and sort of extend the life of the original game by porting it and keeping it going with new technology. That's a good idea. Now, you'd want that for League of Legends, ideally. Then it could have more of a future, then it could last as long as the game is interesting, because the technology could always keep up with it. But at the moment, it is a concern if you're thinking long-term on League of Legends, how long it can last with this old version.
Yeah. I would assume they're working on something else, and I hope League of Legends lasts for many more years. I think it's a good competitive title, and it's a good esport, and I really enjoy working with the game. But, I mean, I just don't know what the lifespan of this particular game is going to be. So I mean, it's all speculative, though. Like, I don't really know why they would sell that last 7% to Tencent.
So I read
theories, really.
Some sort of summary of whatever that like sort of conference thing I think they had was, where it was mentioned that Riot had been pondering whether to expand the bans, like whether to make it a bit more like Dota, where you have like an extra ban. I mean, in Dota case you have like 5, but maybe you have like an extra ban, or I mean, here's the one that they didn't mention, but this is something that they do in Dota, is obviously in Dota you don't just ban all out at once. You ban and pick. It's like there's a mixture between the two phases. I've never actually asked you this, so what do you think of that in general? I imagine in terms of that second part, you must think it has like some strategic value, right?
Of course, as long as the champion pool is big enough, I do think it offers some interesting strategic points. I guess I think the issue with it perhaps is that a lot of times in League of Legends, especially like at the World Championship this year, the meta was in a really weird place that necessitated like every game certain bans coming through, like Gangplank and Mordekaiser. So I don't think it would have worked well in that particular system. Also, people have said, well, don't you want more bans for LoL? Don't you want more bans for LoL? And I've kind of been like, no, because I think that more bans, I like to see more of the champions, and more bans sort of eliminates that to a certain degree.
Okay. Right. So, first things first, the recent tournament we had was the All-Star tournament. Now, we kind of gave our basic thoughts going into this. We did like a by the numbers that had like our thoughts on the strengths of the teams, etc. So, in this tournament, let's talk first of all about the actual 5v5 games. Now, as it happened, Monty, you know how Korea was definitely going to be the one that had 3-0, and it was unfair the way that Europe was placed in that. Only one team went 3-0 in the groups, my friend. Only one team. Good old EU.
Yep, they did well. I mean, yeah, they showed up at the tournament. I mean, they didn't really show up in the finals, but...
Doesn't matter, mate. You can't take that win away. Froggen, dump stream. It happened. It happened, mate. What did you actually think of that game, though? The LCK versus EU game where EU upset them?
I think they played well. I don't know. It wasn't... I didn't really take the tournament seriously, and I don't think the players did either. They didn't have a reason to, so... I guess I'm just not too invested in the whole All-Star experience.
What did you actually think of... over the whole weekend, in general... Faker didn't really play like you'd expect from him. Like normally in a tournament like this, you'd expect him to go even more ham and style on people.
His Zed play was pretty impressive.
Okay, at that point in the tournament, but elsewhere, he was okay, and he was just not that mega in some of the other games.
Yeah, but who knows what his current situation is? Who knows if he was practicing or if he was on break, or I don't know. Like I find it very difficult to get any read into All Stars or take it seriously. It's just a fun event.
Did you care about the 1v1s at all?
I thought they were fun. They were entertaining. That's the extent of my caring.
Here's my rant about the 1v1s. I think the only reason the 1v1s are tolerable is because of three factors. One, the novelty of seeing people play 1v1 who maybe have never played before, Froggen and Faker, or just you would never put an AD carry against a support. That's the novelty factor. Secondly, this is a really important one. The fact that so many of them end really early, if they were all 15-minute things, I think people would find them a lot more boring. The fact that a lot of them end at like level 2 or level 3 when someone just has a slight advantage and they go all in, that helps. A lot of them were ending in 2 minutes or whatever. And then the third one is, let me think, what is the third reason as to why people enjoy them? I've probably said it all. Maybe I shouldn't have put the two there. Some different matchups, but then also the novelty. So here's the problem I have with it, though, is that I actually think if you looked at the games beyond the novelty and beyond the fact that you've never seen those matchups, and the fact that they end so early, I don't think 1v1 is structured correctly at the moment. Like, I actually think it's quite boring. Like, first of all, those Froggen games were dog shit. Those were terrible.
Well,
I thought it was funny that he was winning and that he was essentially using his own career style of play to wreck people who were like, why isn't he fighting me? Like, yeah, you can still win the game, mate, by having more minions and getting golf. That's how you win the game of League of Legends, believe it or not. That's cool. But here's the thing, okay? I made this point on Twitter. I want to run it by you and see what you think. Because a lot of people thought I was an idiot and didn't know what I was talking about. So my suggestion for how you would do a 1v1 tournament, Monty, is because to me, I have no interest in seeing two champions that have just leveled one ability and have no items, well, one item, a starting item, fight each other. To me, that's crap because you can't do anything with the kit. You have no kit. Sure. You have one ability. Like, all you're doing there is seeing who makes a tiny little error in terms of getting a little bit more out of their champion or whatever. I think it would be cool if you had a 1v1 where you start at level 6 and you get enough gold to buy, say, 2 items, so like 6,000 gold, and you just start at that level. And so it's up to you how you skill it, how you put the thing in. Then you can have a lot of strategy, but also you can then see a bunch of what happened with the kit. And that would be my idea.
I mean, I think that's a really good idea. I think you would have to buff the minion waves at that point, because if you started level 6, it would be, and with a couple items, it would be too easy for like certain champions just to like endlessly wave clear and win in a really lame way. Okay. But I think in principle that's good. You just have to change, I think, the strength of the minions themselves.
Because my main concern, obviously, is that someone like... By the way, half the reason as well why these 1v1s are good is because most people want to make a show and want to go all in and fight and kill each other. If a lot of really good players just played like Froggen did, they could ruin these 1v1 tournaments.
Yeah,
because at the end of the day, if you get the slight lead and the other guy hasn't damaged you off them, you can just farm and win out. Like in a lot of these matchups, it wasn't actually that cool to watch. So anyway, that was my idea because I thought to throw it out there. That's not a bad idea for how you think of it. Because the problem is, League of Legends especially, like for example, when we have 1v1s in Counter-Strike, another game not very much suited to 1v1 by the way, at least in 1v1 on the maps that we use, you get to just pick up the best guns and just shoot each other with the best guns. In CS, in League of Legends, you start with nothing. The least interesting part of the game, where it's not really that great. So anyway, that's just a mini rant I had, because I didn't really find the 1v1s that great, beyond the novelty. I admit, there is something to the novelty of seeing a support player play a jungler or whatever. Yeah. I have to say, by the way, one little shout out, one little shot across the bow. When Score was playing against someone, I think was it Reckless or someone? It was against someone who was like a carry type player. They kept talking about, well, of course, he is a jungler, so I wonder how he'll do here. I kept thinking, he played years as an AD carry, right? Yeah. And all the AD carries are the ones beasting this tournament. Like, guys, I think you might have forgotten something here. He's not a jungler. He is... I mean, if anything, that shows what a great job he's done as a jungler, Monty, that they forgot he actually is like an AD carry main.
He was an AD carry for a long time, and he was a very successful one at that, so...
And also, it is kind of telling, by the way, that Doublelift said he hadn't won any of his 1v1s against his teammates, but he made it to the final of the tournament. Now, what I'm saying by that is, that happens in Counter-Strike as well. In Counter-Strike, because 1v1 is so drastically different to a real game, and you can also, by the way, in the 1v1 maps, exploit the map in the same way you can exploit the specialized magma chamber map. It means that you get weird results where people win who actually in a game would never outperform the other person, So again, it's just a fun thing. Don't take it too seriously. Like, obviously Froggen isn't actually better than Faker on the basis that he won a game against even this.
Anivia versus Anivia matchup that they
have to say though,
previously.
But with that said, Monty, I don't know if anyone could beat Froggen in Anivia versus Anivia.
No, that's great. That's why it was fun to see Froggen versus Faker. Like, I like that they made that agreement because I found it entertaining.
Though I would also, in an alternate world, have enjoyed watching Faker go and just toss Doublelift in the fucking dumpster. Not least because, here's the key thing about Doublelift that somehow he avoided in this tournament. Usually, Doublelift actually chokes. I've seen him play 1v1s on stream. Famously, there's a video where he played Reginald when he joined TSM, and he lost the first 3 1v1s to Reginald. And half the reason why is because of the pressure of playing Reginald, he panicked and did that noob thing where you just stand still and spam all your skill shots. And he was, in one of them, he was in a Cassiopeia 1v1, so he just got everything onto him and just got wrecked completely. And all Reginald did is move and therefore win the fight. And so, I reckon versus Faker, Doublelift would have seriously... Put it this way, to use a British euphemism, it would have been brown trousers time. He would have gotten humiliated and he would have absolutely shit himself. That's
never heard
it's good,
that
right?
British
It's good.
Before.
We've got so many like that, mate. You got to realize we've got so many like that. It's good though, right? Brown trousers time. You can keep that one, guys. So... yeah, I didn't think that much of this tournament. To me, the whole point of All-Stars, as it is in real sports, is it's supposed to be a fun tournament. The idea is you're supposed to vote in just the best players at their position. Obviously, it's really just a popularity contest, but the conceit is it's the best players. And then the idea is to just mix them up and see what would happen. It shouldn't actually matter for anything. And I'm glad that this year you don't decide a fucking Worlds slot based on it, like they did in Season 3, which is ludicrous.
Well, it was ludicrous, but they definitely realized that. I mean, from talking to Riot, it was pretty apparent that that is not how you should run. A fan vote shouldn't alter like the real competitive scene in any way.
One question I do have for you, and this is something I brought up again as a complaint. Do you agree with me that the whole Team Fire, Team Ice thing is probably a waste of time in terms of the 5v5? Like, just have a group stage and have everyone play everyone.
Yeah, I didn't really like that.
It's not as cool to not see EU versus LPL. That would have been cool this time, right? Because we saw EU did quite well. How would they have done versus LPL,
Yeah, I agree.
And obviously, it goes without saying, Monty, I wanted to see LCK play NALCS. That's just a game I wanted to see. Listen, guys, we had the perfect ending to Darius' career. Can't we send him out with another game against a carry top laner from Korea? Come on, just once. Can't we just have that last game? Just for old time's sake. Brilliant. Anyway, Korea did win in the end.
But, to the surprise of none.
and sadly it allowed Froggen to even. No, actually, yeah, it sadly allowed Faker to even up his record with Froggen. So, I mean, really, Froggen should have subbed himself out and had Niels play mid lane in the final. Just be like, I've got a 2-0 record versus Faker. Like, you know, I'm going to retire with that and never play him again. Actually, so okay, Pawn. I'm the one man who beat Faker. Anyway, so moving on. So we had a tournament coming up, which is IEM Cologne. Do you want to do IEM Cologne now or roster moves now?
I want to do schedule change for LCS now.
All right, that one, yeah. Okay. So the schedule change is that NA is moving to best of 3 and EU is moving to best of 2. Now, before you get into, Monty, the pros and cons, and yes, there are definitely pros to a best of 2 and it has its own unique charms, and in some senses it's maybe even the fairest one, but I just want to ask you this question, Monty. Don't address it from Monte Cristo's point of view. I want you to address this aspect. The fact in Europe, we prefer ties and best of 2 legs, and there to be no winner. What do you think about that cultural analysis by Riot Games? I want to know your thoughts on that, Monty.
Well, you know what? I would not deign to actually tell European viewers what they prefer in terms of their broadcasts or sporting experiences, as it were. I would not go there myself. I do think that, and just having watched your video, like, about the whole situation, which I think was good, but I do think that you kind of missed the point, because even though I think we can all agree that Riot's announcement was bad about this, because it was mostly about this like weird and silly justification about this is why we're doing XYZ, right? And why we wanted to do this with different regions and blah, 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 blah. I think that even though I didn't like the way they explained it, and I don't think anybody else did either, I do think that you're focusing way too much on that and not the actual fact that the change itself is good.
No, the change is good, but here's the problem. This is one thing you'll never see me do in esports, Monty. The reason why I don't give people maximum credit is because if you fuck up willfully the first time, you don't get like bonus credit for then correcting your own mistakes. So in this scenario, there's a second aspect. Yes, best of 2 is better than best of 1. My problem is they still haven't explained to me why best of 2 specifically is better for Europe, but not NA. That's my problem. My problem is they should have decided. By the way, I'm fine with them having best of 2 in NA as well. I think it's actually a good format. It's fair for the sides. It actually, in a way, it allows you to still play and not have fluke cheese, but also set up for the playoff matchup when you play. There's a lot of benefits to best of 2, actually. I just haven't seen them make a good reason as to why Europe would get the best of 2.
Well, I think the most compelling reason, like beyond the soccer versus NFL nonsense that was in that post, is that this was actually something that was intentionally chosen by Riot EU. And the offices are very independent of each other. And so if that's going to be Riot EU's take on this whole situation, if that's what Riot EU wants to do for EU, then that's fine. They also said in the announcement that it was going to be an experiment to see which format they thought worked better overall, right?
Okay.
So if they feel that they need time to make that decision, it makes sense.
I have to say, though, one thing as a backlash, because a lot of the backlash was against European people, because they were the ones complaining about they wanted best of 3 instead. I have to say, I think it's a bit disingenuous or just naive. The people, I mean, I'll give you an example. Travis is someone who said this. He suggested that people were just complaining no matter what. And he actually said this line. He said, if it had been the other way round, EU would have complained they didn't have best of 2. Come on, mate. No, they wouldn't. It would be the other way around. NA would complain they didn't have best of 3. I think both regions wanted the best of 3. Now, again, that's not to say I think best of 3 is necessarily the best format. It is in an isolation of one match, but is it for a season? You can make a compelling case for both. In fact, I actually think, unfortunately, because of the side imbalance in League, best of 2 is probably better.
Yeah. I actually, and here's the other thing. I'm really the only person who's cast both best of 2 and best of 3 in a League format, and I like them both for different reasons. Like you said, I think there is value in, because of the side imbalance, which side is better, whether it's blue or red side, changes on the patch, really, right? Because a lot of it's pick and ban based, and how many OPs there are and how many OPs are going to get through. If there are more OP champions in the game, then it is better for a red side because they get 2 picks, generally speaking. Or there are other factors too, such as how good is a mid counter pick or a top counter pick in a certain patch, and that could make red side better also. So there's a lot of factors to consider when you think about it, but yes, there is always going to be a certain amount of imbalance due to the nature of the draft.
I also like the fact is that people didn't really mention, which is a good thing about best of 2 is you get rewarded for winning a game.
Yeah.
Best of 3, sorry, you won the first game, cool, great, but you lost the series, so you get nothing.
Well, that comes down to tiebreakers, because like a lot of tiebreakers, I assume, they haven't announced tiebreakers in NA, but it'll probably be like head-to-head record followed by match differential. So because if you are going -1, like going down 1-2 every series, that's a good tiebreaker in terms of seeding and spot in the league, right? So that's not exactly true. Like, it will mean something. Whether or not they prioritize match differential over head-to-head record. So, for example, if Dignitas goes 0-2 to Energy, but Dignitas overall had more like 2-0 wins and 1-2 losses, they could have more like a higher match differential, or a lower match differential rather. And so how will they break ties? Will they break ties if Energy and Dignitas end up tied in terms of best of 3s? Does that mean that the tiebreaker is the head-to-head, or does it mean that the first tiebreaker is the match differential? So that's a question to ask, right? Because that determines how much what the value on losing 1-2 or winning 2-1 is.
Okay, so it will have a value, but my point essentially is, here's the thing, okay, so here's what's funny. In general, as I've explained many times, I'm not really in favor of like scrubs or lesser teams. I don't care about those teams doing well. But just because I don't want Cheese to ruin the league, like if it's best of 1, Cheese just wins the entire game for you. At the same time, I don't mind the idea that in league play, where it's not about just determining a win, it's about like actually playing each game, that you at least bet, if someone does a cool Cheese, cool, you get a game. Now, if you can't follow up on game 2, it's even, okay, but you get something for it. There's still a reward for innovating and trying something. Like, for example, I am not against someone like Gravity getting some wins off Keen doing some cheese picks. I just don't want him to then win the fucking league because of that and get some mad first place seed or whatever could have happened in that scenario, you know. It's a balance between the two. I think it's a good compromise.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with best of 2. So the European fans also seem to be complaining about the fact that there was like, what was it? There was like some weirdness with the broadcast schedule, but
it's an extra day for NA.
Well, it's not only an extra day for NA; it's also the EU
weekdays,
broadcast time. But what I don't understand about that is that it's actually, in my opinion, and this was explained by Magus on Reddit, that this is actually better because if they were to put EU on the weekends in the evening, like NA, or in the if they were to put EU on in the weekends in the evening or in the morning EU or around noon, starting around noon, right? It would be really nearly impossible for NA people to view it, right? Whereas if they put NA on in the evenings on Thursday and Friday, EU fans couldn't watch it. And there actually is, I know, a lot of crossover viewership between the NA and EU LCS. So the system that they have right now actually allows them to broadcast all the games in time zones that everyone can watch, right?
That's also, though, another example of where it's a really good example of why esports isn't as big as other sports. Because at the end of the day, they're having to balance 2 leagues against each other so they can get as much viewership as they can. No one's balancing the Premier League games against the Bundesliga games in Germany. They just run independently, and fans of the Premier League are just going to watch the Premier League, fans of the other one. Because that ties into my next point, Monty. A really good thing I think they did is I love the fact that the games are now simultaneous. I think it always should have been that way. One thing I've always complained to you about is I hated the notion that they wanted you to watch every game in a row. And if you want to wait for this Alliance game that's going to be awesome, you have to sit through Copenhagen Wolves versus SK or some lesser game, you know, and that's going to be 2 hours of your time. I'd rather it's like you can sort of pick and choose to some degree which ones you watch and which ones you don't, or you get on board later if you care.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fine too. I think the simultaneous streams will be good. I don't have an issue with that. I think it makes sense.
Got him, boys. He thinks simultaneous streams are good. Got him.
I always said that. When have I
Except in
not said
Korea,
that?
right? There we go. I got him.
No,
Trap card activated.
No, that's another aspect of this, right? And the streams aren't going to be simultaneous in Korea, right? That's the difference.
Sure.
So that's not even happening here. So
What do you mean they're not going to be simultaneous?
they're not going to be simultaneously streamed. That's the thing, is that they're going to be set times. OGN is going to broadcast all of the games in Korea.
Yeah.
They're not going to be simultaneous with SPO TV.
So what does SPO TV do then?
They broadcast. The simultaneous broadcast happened between SPO TV and OGN of the same game.
Yeah? Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you mean there. Well, actually,
Yeah.
it's the other way around. It will be simultaneous broadcasts in OGN. It's just of the same game. Whereas the difference is simultaneous is like two different games at the same time. Okay.
Yes.
That's what was confusing me when you said that.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
So we understand that point. It was also a joke, Money. But anyway, moving on. It wasn't something to actually analyse. By the way, though, I got to say, I think I did pretty much call you on that, though, where you were just like, why are people so upset about this change? And then I was like, that's you. Like, what's the big deal, guys? You know, is it that big a deal? Then like 1 second later, like, this logo is historically inaccurate in a video game. What the fuck is this shit? And everyone's like, calm down, man. Is it that big a deal? Like, yes, it's very important to me. As an ancient Greek, I am offended. Like, also, Monty, surely the only person who actually should have been mad about that was Forgiven, and I didn't even see him weigh in. It's almost like he doesn't care about the history of his own country. Though I've got to say, by the way, Monty, the saddest thing, maybe you can speak to this because you went to Egypt recently. I hope that wasn't some sort of like leak there where you didn't want people to know because you actually went to a terrorist cell, and one day my whole life will be redacted in an interview where they try and force me with waterboarding to say if you had any connection with Al-Zakawi or whatever. Anyway, so the one problem I have, Monty, with Egypt and Greece is because of my love of like mythology and ancient history and antiquity. I love the ancient history around this, like the Hellenistic era in Greece,
Sure.
and obviously the Egyptian period. Wonderful times, incredible like knowledge that came from these times. You know, the big problem, if you want to explore that, is people think, oh cool, just go to Egypt, just go to Greece. Yeah, you know, the people who live there now have nothing to do with the people I'm talking about before. Some of them, like the Greeks, aren't even genetically related to those people.
Not.
And unfortunately, even though all the buildings and shit are still there, the rest of it is actually nothing like that. There's nothing like it. It's like trying to go to New York and thinking you're going to go to 1970s New York from some movie, you know. You're not. It's going to be radically different now. It's going to be nothing like that cool aspect in the movie.
Yeah.
Did you experience anything like that?
I mean, no, I had a really nice time. I didn't think it was, like, in terms of the sites and everything that I saw, the temples, it was quite fascinating.
Was it did you have any sort of, like, did you have some sort of awe-like feeling when you were in the presence of the pyramids and stuff?
Yeah, it was incredible. It was pretty impressive.
See, on one hand, you were there, you were in front of this majesty of human creation. I'm not talking just about the physical act of building a pyramid, which we still don't understand how they did, but to me it's the conceptual aspect, the bringing down from the imagination an idea that is tangibly put into the world that seems impossible. Just the scope of that must have awed you, must have made you feel like, wow, an incredible world, what the human imagination is capable of. And at the same time, you were stood next to Chris Badawi, so you also had sort of the profane, the money, the real world business, Mammon present, incarnate in himself, right next to you, just to keep you tethered, keep you grounded to earth, right, Monty? That's how you feel it, I'm sure.
That's exactly my perception of that entire situation.
Yeah. For anyone who doesn't know, I actually met Chris Badawi, and it was like this. I just roasted him the whole time for like 3 hours non-stop. That's why I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good time, but he's a good egg. What can I tell you? So I enjoyed it. So
I'm glad I could provide that experience for you, sir.
it was great. So what else was there? Let me see. Let's just do the rosters first before we do the tournaments, because some of the rosters are actually going to affect.
Wait, I want to say something first about this whole, like, so with the simultaneous broadcast thing, I think that one of the most hilarious aspects of it to me was that Riot played off the actual change in the broadcast, right?
As something to grow esports.
As something to grow esports.
I still don't understand that aspect, right? Their implication was, by diversifying the broadcast to multiple broadcasters, that's how you grow esports, because then you'll have two television stations, for example, invested and showing the game, etc. The problem is, actually your point then applies, which is by the same logic, shouldn't you diversify the LCS broadcast?
Exactly. And that's the thing. People are like, oh, well, Spo TV is a traditional sports, broadcaster. All of that, it brings value, and that's why they're doing it. But, I mean, what can I tell you? Like, it's not Spo TV. Yes, they have big channels for sports, but they use Spo TV games for their gaming broadcasts, like StarCraft 2. And actually, that channel is much less prevalent in Korea than OGN in terms of its appearance on cable networks and everything like that. So it's not really true that it's going to actually broaden the broadcast by that much. And also, in terms of competition, I think the main issue is that who is Spo TV going to get for casters to cast this league, especially when they have to go head-to-head necessarily in every single broadcast with OGN. So I don't actually see how it possibly benefits competition. But Riot wants to pay Spo TV to do this. Like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And Spo TV is not... Their games channel does not have the same resources that OGN does. They haven't traditionally made broadcasts up to the caliber of OGN. Maybe they will now, but I kind of doubt it. And the whole thing is they're basically trying to diversify for the good of esports, which would be fine, but this situation doesn't really reflect, I feel, that reality. And for me, that's like the primary issue, right? And so for them to say something like, okay, we want to do this for the good of esports in Korea, well, at the same time, you are bringing in a simultaneous broadcast with the LCS, right? They want to do this thing that, in my opinion, could be quite valuable for a broadcaster like ESL or DreamHack or MLG or any of these third-party broadcasters to take that secondary stream. And people will point out the LCS previously that was hosted by ESL and say, well, they didn't do a very good job. That was also like several years ago now, and ESL has expanded a lot since then. They were bought by a Swedish TV conglomerate called MTG for $80 million. Presumably, if they had the LCS rights, they could put on a much more robust production at this stage in time. And if Riot is actually interested in growing esports around the world, when they have simultaneous broadcasts, why wouldn't they go to these companies and pay them like they're paying Spo TV, give them the resources to make these changes? Like, it literally makes no sense. Their stance doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, especially because that's the thing. If the logic applied in Korea, it would apply elsewhere. Like, it would be good to have multiple places showing LCS and all different players. Because the notion is, especially as well, if you're not just doing it for the money you get from the channel, your naive way of presenting it would be, well, we're going to increase the viewership because we're going to get their viewers from their channel and they'll use their marketing methods, which might be different, to bring more people in, and that's how we're going to grow the game. I don't know. Well, we'll have to see what the numbers are like, but I don't imagine it will change much of the growth in that particular respect.
No, I don't think it will either. But again, and I understand that part of this is Riot Korea is a different entity than Riot NA that's making these decisions. But you can't just say in one region, we're doing this change to move to multiple broadcasters for the good of the game, right? And for the good of esports is what they said in their original announcement, and then come back and create this situation where it doesn't even make sense. Like, it doesn't make any sense what they're doing.
Also, this is actually one of the reasons, Monty, why I actually created the Thorin's Thoughts series. Is years ago, I used to, from being behind the scenes in the industry, I would see press releases and I would see statements in interviews, and I would think, fuck, I know exactly what that means. Like, I know what the implication of that is, but the way it's presented is presented in such formal business language that a lot of people, it'll just go over their heads and they'll just think, well, it's no big deal. Someone's just saying something, something simple. So one of the areas where I had that tingling, my senses were tingling, Monty, was where OGN came out and they made that statement where in it they mentioned that actually, Riot's money doesn't even account for, I think they said not even half of the costs.
Not even half, yeah.
What people have to understand is that's not a minor thing. Them doing that was some next level gangster move where essentially the public thinks Riot pays for all of the OGN stuff, and they pay them a massive amount of money. That's so much money. But then by coming out and going, they don't even actually pay even half of it. That's some gangster level shit, but with polite business language where you've just put the other guy on blast. Well, how are you going to respond to this, mate? Because we're kind of showing that actually we invest a lot and we have to get a lot of sponsors ourselves. And if we're doing it, then we're providing some value ourselves that isn't just coming from you. I thought that was a pretty interesting move by OGN.
Yeah, I think it was a very interesting move, but it was an accurate one. You know what I mean? Like,
I realize
that's true.
This is a shaky area for you to answer, Monty. But what did you think? I wrote a column on this topic. Right, ignoring all aspects of like, yes, making LCK allows everyone to watch for free and they can watch all the VODs for free and all. I can see benefits to all these things. Like, yes, it's true that without a paywall, certain people will get to experience that wouldn't. But one thing that I was upset about, that when the paywall got removed from OGN, is that think about what an incredible accomplishment it is to get millions of dollars in money from Westerners to watch an English language broadcast of a Korean league. No one's done anything like that in esports ever. Subscription model that successful.
I love the thread that came out that were saying like the viewership numbers for Korean League of Legends. By the end of 2013, by the summer finals, there were over 250,000 simultaneous viewers for the KT Bullets versus SK Telecom match on Twitch, that 5-game series that ended with the Faker Zed play. Like, it's not like we were getting crap viewership. Yes, in the beginning, when it first switched to Twitch, because you have to understand that Champions was on like a proprietary player for the first 2 seasons. It was not on Twitch. Yes, when it was first on Twitch, I would say that on average, we had about 5,000 to 8,000 viewers for the average group stage game. But by the time 2014 ended, group stage games were frequently in the, like, I say average 40,000. It was an incredibly high, like, I can't say.
I remember those games are really early in the morning for Europe and really late at night for NA.
I know what some of the subscriber numbers were, and I can't say them for obvious reasons, but it was a very well subscribed channel, and a lot of the playoff games would routinely break 100, 150,000 concurrents on Twitch. So when people are saying that, oh, they only had 20,000, like that's just straight up wrong. And there were a lot of subs on that channel, and it is not by any means an exaggeration to say that OGN lost, I would say, bare minimum $1 million a year when they switched over to the Riot channel. And now Riot compensated OGN for that. Sure. It's not like they didn't. But
okay, but my point with that was essentially you did, like, that's why I use the analogy of the golden goose. You literally disassembled something no one has ever done. I mean, GSL, by the way, did it to a much lower scale because do you remember GSL?
They were still very successful with their subscribers.
Yeah, but the thing with theirs was it was only online. It wasn't. They weren't on a TV channel.
Sure, but the subscribers were only online because this was for the global audience, right?
Sure, but that's a different product in that sense. It was built around that, whereas this was like built as an extra thing to be. I mean, the real thing they were doing was run the Korean broadcast on Korean television. So to build in a foreign viewer is incredible, and the success they'd had with it was amazing. And unfortunately, by dismantling it, who knows if we'll ever see that again? Yeah, you have no way of knowing.
I don't know what OGN is going to do in the future if they decide to go for, different games and what their plans are. But yeah, I mean, it was a very big success for OGN. It was.
Because the reason I make that point is it's not as simple as Riot just gave OGN the rights to do it for a while, then gave them some money, and I guess OGN just did an okay job. No. They knocked it completely out the park and did something that someone like Riot will never be able to do. Riot doesn't have I bet if you did in the West a subscription model like that, I don't know if you'd have the same sort of success, especially not, by the way, to a foreign audience. You wouldn't get fucking Koreans to watch NALCS and pay that subscription fee and get that many viewers. So
that's true.
That was a very good accomplishment, which obviously showed that OGN brought their own value to the broadcast beyond just putting it on their channel. It's not as simple as that,
Yeah, it absolutely isn't as simple as that. I mean, it was a pretty big feat that OGN managed to do. So that's part of the frustration too that I think OGN had, but it definitely was, it was good revenue for OGN. And you have to also consider, like, when we talk about the OGN stream, like the foreign stream, all you have to ask is what were the costs of running that stream? Because the production value doesn't really change whether they have it's not like they're doing more production because they have a global broadcast, right? In this particular situation, the global broadcast is basically just a rider onto the regular broadcast, right? So think of it as basically the cost of running a global broadcast to OGN compared to what they were already doing is quite low, right? They essentially add a camera and Doa Mai and Chobra or Papa Smithy's salaries, but it's not increasing the cost of running the studio. It doesn't really drastically increase any cost at all. So
I mean, your salary's not. It's not chicken feed money. Let's be real about that.
Sure, but compared to, it's not like, what I'm saying is that to add the global broadcast, it added much more, like a lot more percent return, right? It's a really good return for them. Investment. So that was another factor too. I don't know. I mean, it's frustrating. I understand why Riot did it. I mean, it did lower the quality of the broadcast because OGN's broadcast was just in higher. It was in 1080. Riot doesn't broadcast in 1080. Some people like the chat experience that they got through that particular aspect of the broadcast.
Okay, so some interesting roster moves have happened and teams announced. So the one I want to start with is the formation of H2K. So we got this lineup where they retained Odoamne, the top laner, Ryu, the mid laner, but then they brought in Jankos and Vander from the jungler and support of Rockat previously, and then they brought in Forgiven, most recently of Gambit, and that's the team overall. Now, I actually did a video on this, so I've gone actually into quite a lot of depth if people want to watch that, but I'll repeat some of it as we go on. But what was your first thoughts when you saw this lineup, Monty?
I think it's really strong on paper. I think that they've shown that they can retain their shot caller in Odoamne, who had a very good, I think, year in 2015. And they kept Ryu, and then they added a very potent jungle support combo that has a lot of built-up synergy from playing on Rockat, and then they added one of the best laning AD carries in the world. So, I mean, seems pretty damn good to me.
Like, the key area that I focused in on in my video is that all the other super team lineups, okay, so there's the TSM one, to a lesser degree, there's the one that's now Vitality. These lineups that on paper look like good players at all positions. I think this is the best version of a team that's like a super team on paper that I've ever seen. As in, not everyone's a superstar player, and that's the key thing. They were top players, but some of them, like Odoamne, Ryu to a degree, were more supportive in as much as they were like good players. So as a result, I think the balance, because if you put Forgiven into a lineup, that's immediately going to be like, the gravity around Forgiven alone is going to be huge. You're going to have to base the team around him if you want to get the most out of him. Therefore, you don't want to have two gold Hongi carries in the other two traditional carry roles. So you add in the fact that Odoamne is very self-sufficient, worked with very low econ. Ryu doesn't need a massive amount of ganks. It can wait till the team fight to have his impact. So you can put all your support around Forgiven. Then, considering you're making a brand new lineup, you bring in the jungle support synergy that already existed in a past team. So I actually think this, I think all the parts on paper at least look fantastic. Like, I can't think of any real flaws when I look at it at the moment.
I think it's great.
Like, it's one of the few lineups where I've seen where I almost don't feel like I have to go, oh, well, it could all go to shit. I can't see this being bad. I don't know if it'll be the best. Obviously, maybe it won't be the absolute, maybe it won't fulfill all the potential, but I think it has to at least be good.
Yeah, I think they did a very good job of assembling a solid team. And I'm really excited to see them play at Cologne. I think they can definitely win the entire thing. And the key thing is that they've been practicing a lot, too, as I understand it, in Europe. So they're not coming in quite as raw as Fnatic, who also seems to have a pretty good roster on paper. They will be, I think, more refined.
Here's a weird question for you. I suspect last year you thought Svenskeren was a better jungler than Jankos, correct? Jankos.
I think they were both pretty even.
I think in the spring, Jankos had his problems and Svenskeren was unreal in the spring.
That's true.
Obviously, SK was dog shit in the summer. So here's my question. Did H2K win out or lose that they lost Svenskeren and ended up with Jankos?
I think because they got Vander, they won. Because they got the package deal, that was the really valuable thing.
Yeah, I have similar thoughts. Like, as an individual player, I might give the edge to Svenskeren. I think he's a sick player. But again, though, his style of jungle, when he's at his best games, I go more towards the rush carry jungle style. Like, that's when I saw him at his best. So I think when you look at this team, Yeah, Jankos is going to do a lot of ganking, but he's still going to be... It's going to be to feed his carries, as it were, to get them rolling. So I think, ideally, putting someone like Jankos with Forgiven, especially someone who complains 24/7 about not having gank spot lane, that sounds ideal to me. And that's why it's funny that I made that video after he joined SK about, like, there's no more excuses for Forgiven. Because actually, after the fact, you can see there were excuses. Like, Fox wasn't quite ready to be a superstar carry. Freddy fell off to some degree in terms of his picks. Svenskeren was very good, but he never warded. And rated was starting to go to shit. When I look back now, there were a few excuses you could have. This lineup, there are no excuses. Forgiven doesn't do really well in this lineup. Don't care, mate. You may as well retire. I don't want to ever hear again that you're super good and you're going to be really good. I mean, what excuse could you have at this point in time?
Yeah, they've definitely built a team that he needs to be able to work with at this stage.
Without giving any details, I will tell you this. Here's one thing that is fucked up if you know Forgiven as a person, right? He will literally message me before games are played, telling me how they'll probably won't do very well in this game, and they haven't practiced enough for this, and you know they'll probably just lose this game outright. It's like, can you just wait till you lose the fucking game before you make the excuses? It's like, this is such a terrible mentality to have. So that's the only negative I can think of here. This is someone who tries to predict the future of how things will go badly before they go badly. I mean, unfortunately, if his whole country had tried that, they might be in a better economic situation.
Oh,
there we go. Anyway, economic jokes at this point. But, so, okay, anyway. So, the H2K. Okay, obviously, there's still some lineups to potentially be set in the regions. Could this H2K team be the best Western team?
Could be. I think there's a lot of potential in Fnatic and TSM, too. I think both those rosters are pretty good. Obviously, Immortals looking strong, too. So...
Because just, here's the thing people don't understand. People think I was overhyping this team. I think it's more, I'm not saying they're going to be super good and they're going to make the semis of Worlds. But when I looked at this team on paper, because it's such a great construction on paper, and all the pieces balance out and make sense as to how they're going to work with each other, at least how you would hypothesize, the potential is there for, like the sky's the limit in terms of a Western team, I think, with this lineup.
I think looks really strong. I'm excited.
So another EU team is Fnatic. Now, Fnatic haven't officially announced all aspects of their roster, but it seems fair. First of all, it seems almost certain that Gamsu and Spirit are the top laner and jungler.
Yes.
And then it seems quite likely, and it had already been rumoured previously, that Noxiac, this German challenger support player, will be the support player. So what does that lineup look like on paper to you?
This lineup could be really good, but they may have shot calling issues because they're moving away from Yellowstar and Reignover. And into a situation where the jungler really doesn't speak English. I don't know how good Gamsu's English is after his year in NA. I would assume it's decent, but again, I don't actually know that for sure. How could I?
In the context of losing Yellowstar, I'm just going to go ahead and say they will have shot calling issues. Now, that doesn't mean that the shot calling will be bad and they can't play, but I can't see any way they could possibly be as good as with Yellowstar, because he's actually shown himself to be one of the best shot callers we've ever seen in League of Legends.
Yeah, especially in the West, right.
And, most crucially, you look at the career of Reckless, he was always at his best when he was with Yellowstar. He went away and he played with Nif. He was quite good with N-rated, but admittedly for a short amount of time at the end of Season 2. But Yellowstar was the one where that's where it clicked the best. That he was able to be used the best, be the most effective. So I'm also looking to see what happens to Reckless now. Like, how does he play with this brand new support? How does he adapt to that? Do they have to change the style up? Will they play the same style as they used to before?
It's a big question, right? Really difficult to tell how exactly that particular experiment is going to go.
Especially because what I want to know is, Gamsu, if you bring him in theory, you want him to be a star. You want him to be a potential carry top laner. So if he's going to be the carry top laner, okay, Febiven didn't lane so well, but as Worlds went on, we saw him have very good performances. Will Reckless again just result into being like the one of the three traditional carries who doesn't go for the full carry route again? Will he have to actually go up? Will Febiven still be the insurance? There's actually, potentially, the guy who can shine the most in this lineup for me is Febiven, actually. This is his chance to come forwards and be like a legit star beyond being the super sick insurance policy who every now and then went crazy.
Well, and that's incredibly important, right? That fact alone, because Febiven has been showing a remarkable amount of growth over the course of this year, so he's already stepped up, in my opinion. And that makes it, I think he can do it. Like, I think he can absolutely do it.
Sure, but I think people went a bit too far. As in, they almost made out like he was like hard carrying the team. Like, nah, not really. He had his times when he had a fantastic team around him. Remember, a well-coached team as well. So that's why I'm interested now to see this season. When you take away the god tier shot caller, you take away this top jungle synergy that was working so well. At one point, the top was the carry of the team. Now I want to see how does he do in this new environment. Just like I want to see how Records does with a new support. I think there's still questions to be answered to these. I mean, in Records' case, he has played a long time. But in Featherman's case, he only played a year, remember? He only played 2 splits. So let's see how he does this time. And with a new jungler.
I still think he's going to do fine. I think he's a very young, very motivated player who has shown a pretty natural increase over time.
So, if you had to guess, do you think that this Fnatic team will win LCS?
No, I think Origin is probably the better team. But we can see how they do. I just have a lot of faith in Origin after the performances that they turned in at the World Championship, and, they looked quite strong.
I think that one area as well where people are really going to miss Yellow Star is not just the shot calling, which I think was very important to winning some of the games, but I also think Yellow Star had like natural authority over some of the other players because he's so fantastic as the shot calling, the leader and the veteran. So you're missing that immediately. Who's the leader of this team? There is no leader. There's no obvious leader in this team. There's no veteran.
It's definitely a hard team, I think, to coach. Spirit would
and
be,
obviously
but
he
again,
doesn't speak English. Yeah,
Spirit's English is unless it's massively increased since I last knew him, which I have no reason to believe that it has, considering he's coming from China. It's not great.
So there's that factor, and then the other factor. Here's where people are going to think I'm a heretic, Monty. I think what we're going to find out is that I think Daylor will still be a good coach. I think he'll still do well and coach the team well. But I think you'll find out that it was the combo of all of it that made the team super good. I don't think he's some god of coaching who's above all the Western coaches, who's figured it all out, and he knew all of it. I think it helps having fucking Yellow Star in the team, who clearly has a mega sense for the players he plays with, and then shot calls brilliantly in the game. I think you're going to see a lot more slips and at times where they adapt and they don't do the right move, and you'll see some missteps from Daylor this day. He's not just turned up, and he's not just going to be the god of coaching, put it that way, I don't think.
Yeah, I would agree with you, and I would also say that, again, Origin, at this point, not making any kind of roster moves is really encouraging for them as a team, right?
Except Power of Evil, obviously.
Well, that's an upgrade in my mind.
Yeah, I think so, too. I think that makes Origin better. Here's the question, Monty. So I talked about coaching. I talked about like perceptions on the outside of what coaching's worth and how important it is, and now maybe inside the team different things are going on. My boy came out with it, Monty. You know, one of the reasons I love Soaz, beyond his style of play and his unique flair, I love his personality, which is so badly attuned to be working in social media and working with fans. Because 90% of his social media interaction essentially translates to, fuck the fans. You're all idiots. Now, obviously, a man after my own heart, I agree with the sentiment. I love it. I like how he's going there. I also love the idea that because he is a multiple-time LCS champion, Monty, as he, in fact, informed you, and has been to all these worlds and made it super far in the semis, he can actually, to some degree, get away with telling the fans to go fuck themselves and still be successful. So here's what he said on Twitter, Monty. He actually said, think about the context of this, because it's the context afterwards that'll make it beautiful, okay? So initially, I can't remember who they were talking about, which team. It might have been Fnatic, I'm not sure. Whichever team they were talking about coaching aspects. And Soaz essentially said something. In fact, I'll see if I can find the tweet. He essentially said something along the lines of, like, coaches in the West are way worse than in the East, and coaches don't really matter, and they are he put something like, most coaches equal useless. What do you think of that? I'll look for the exact tweet while I'm talking now, but what do you think of that? It's pretty good, right? Most coaches equal. Here's what's great, Monty. He's allowed to say that because he just went to the semis of Worlds. How are you going to talk shit on him? What, are you going to be some TSM fan? No, Loco Doco's an incredible coach. He went to the semi of Worlds. He's saying these guys don't do shit.
I think it's hilarious, personally.
I like it. What do you think of that as an actual statement, though?
I think that perhaps his situation in terms of coaches, maybe that is true, but I don't think it's so easy just to dismiss coaches like that, obviously. I think they're incredibly important to how a team functions, and that, but at the same time, I understand his perspective because he did have a very successful run at the World Championship. I mean, he did have RNA and Hermit there to help out, but they also were a team of very veteran players. So they had been successful for years, and
the one rookie, Niels, had like again. If you're going to be a rookie AD carry, you want Yellow Star or Mithy as your support player, because then you're not going to have any of these problems. They're just going to tell you what to do, basically. So here's the thing. I found the comment. So it was actually in response to me and Dexter talking about. Okay, so here's the quick version. When the R8 came out, and lots of League of Legends people were like, haha, something is broken in another game. League of Legends doesn't look so bad. I struck back with a shot about the fact that, like, well, at least our World Championship wasn't, like, wrecked by fucking imbalance and broken shit. Because obviously Mordekaiser and Gangplank, it's not that they were optional bans. They were banned in, like, every game except 2 or something retarded. And most of the time, it had to be the same team banning them. So one team lost 2 bans immediately. So that obviously is going to have a big impact on your championship. So anyway, the aside point is Dexter was arguing, well, you know, in other tournaments there was, like in Season 4, Alistair and Zillion were banned a lot. So as we were going backwards and forwards, Dexter made this point. He said, keep in mind that the game evolved too. And with coaches, the pick ban for all teams across the board got better. So in jumps Soaz, who at this point hasn't been any part of the conversation, a wild Soaz appears and uses arrogance, and it's very effective. He says, yeah, coaches made pick ban better, guys! Exclamation point XD. And then Dexter says, fuck the coach, Paul Boyer 2015. Haven't heard that one before. Going to Reddit. So then Soaz responds, I respect the fact that they try. That's just the way he phrased that alone is so beautiful. I respect the fact that they try, and it's going to be better in the future. So listen, nice effort. Keep trying. Maybe it'll work one day. But now coaches equal useless. Brilliant. Yeah.
I mean,
and then it gets better, Monty. There's a follow-up. This is the part where you're really going to love it, because this is something only Soaz would do. Because the thing is, he can pull off the BM. If Forgiven does it, it does look obnoxious. Because Soaz is French, he can pull off this sheer arrogance. With us, you almost like it. It enamors you to him. So if that wasn't bad enough, he's already said coach is equally useless. So someone responds to him, only coach you ever had is Leduc. How can you know? And Soaz just responds, delete your Twitter, please. It's good, right? It's good. He's coming with fire every time. His rebuttal game's incredible. I love it. But you know what's great about that, though, by the way, Monty, is, listen, I don't know Leduc personally. I don't know Hermit personally. But I'm sorry, but the implication from this is Soaz is including them as well. He didn't think they were of, like, a massive amount of use to fixing everything in the game, coaching them. I imagine Soaz and some of the Origin players think we did a lot of that shit.
They may have, but that's the thing too, is that it could have been a very collaborative effort with the players and their coaching staff. And I mean, part of coaching, right, is being able to arrive at the right conclusion, whether or not you have that information. If you're guiding, in my opinion, if you're guiding discussions well around pick and ban and increasing the efficiency and using your resources properly, it can be very valuable in and of itself. So I think the pro players sometimes don't value the process of arriving at the conclusions or arriving at the knowledge that they have for, say, a draft phase in the game very well.
Oh, yeah. He also then made a later tweet where a guy who... he's actually someone from your team. A guy from Renegade, so I think it's like the analyst. Yeah, he's the analyst for Renegade, said, like, you know, they like that's part of pick and ban, you know, they aren't useless. So Soaz responded, like, obviously they aren't complete garbage. Again, phrasing game. It doesn't say they aren't garbage, aren't complete garbage. They are to some degree trash. Obviously, he's admitting that, but they're not complete garbage. So they aren't complete garbage, and then I'll skip the rest of it. But then he just says, pros know a lot more about everything in-game / pick ban. Everything, just everything. Pros know a lot more about everything.
That's what gets me, because like you can have a lot of teams have analysts who are certain specialists, right, for level ones. Like you literally just have an analyst who is watching level ones and taking notes. So it's kind of impossible to believe under that scenario that there could be, like, these are people who literally are paid to do nothing but watch level ones. So the belief that somehow the pro players could know more about that is a little far-fetched.
But I do have to say, Monty, here's the thing. This exact attitude existed in all Western players 2 years ago, okay? In the first season of LCS, all of them believed this. So here's the interesting thing. even people like Chauster got beaten down by life. Like, just losses and the accumulated losses, and then teams with coaches overtaking them eventually taught people like Chauster, oh, actually, we do need a coaching structure. I was wrong. Here's the beauty, Monty. This magnificent mutant bastard that is Soaz survived through it, and that's why he's never had to learn that lesson. Because he's never been punished for it in life, Monty. So he had coaches. Maybe he didn't listen to them. Maybe he thought they were just garbage. Still made the semis of Worlds. Still made the furthest that any Western teams ever made it in a Worlds. Therefore, he's never had to learn the lesson. And will he ever learn the lesson? Tune in next episode of Origin in the LCS.
Well, like you said, he hasn't had to learn that lesson because he is an extremely good player. And we have to ask, how did he get so far? How did this guy get so good in the first place? And a lot of that is because he had the drive and the knowledge to continue succeeding even when other teams. So I think he's also confusing himself for other people. Maybe he's a player who doesn't need that much coaching. Entirely possible, right?
Here's what he's doing, Monty. So you know when Faken and Froggen said that Karthus is better than LeBlanc way back when LeBlanc had all the silence and everything. Now, obviously, as a matchup, LeBlanc is better. The reason why Karthus is better is because Froggen and Faker are playing Karthus. That's what Soaz has done in this scenario. In his team, exactly. They might even be at their best playing this. They have this loose style that works for them and they play intuitively great. That's all excellent. And again, not only has he done sick shit in Worlds, he's also never failed to make the finals of a LCS season. So again, it's like I can't say to him, you're wrong, Soaz, in every way. In a weird way, you might be right, but only for you.
And especially when he talks about picks and bans too, because it's important to note about Soaz that he has such a gigantic champion pool that picks and bans probably are really easy for Soaz because he's just going to sit there and say, fuck it, I can play any champion into this matchup, and that does make pick and ban a lot easier, but not every top laner has that capacity, right? Sometimes when you're doing pick and ban, you have to play around the weaknesses of a particular player's champion pool, but Soaz doesn't. He seems to be able to pick up anything at any time.
I feel like I could solve this though. One thing I could at least get him to compromise on, Monty, is the idea that the pros know more and know everything about you, and they know more in general than analysts. All I would do is I'd take him and we'd sit with Double Lift and we'd talk about comps and what we're going to use in the next games and what the meta's going to be. I think maybe half an hour tops. I think I'd have convinced us. Okay, let me rephrase that. Some players know more and some players don't need coaches and coaches aren't complete guaranteed. I think I'd get to him, Monty. I'd break him on that one, I think. Double Lift knows. He knows, mate. He knows. Okay. So let me see. What else was there? Okay, so actually, does the fact that Origin is the team that's made the least moves of any top team, but have potentially upgraded, are they the favourite to be the Western team, as it stands right now?
I think it's too early to say. Maybe in the spring season, I mean, come MSI, that may be a true statement, but by the time the year is absolutely 100% over, like, a lot can change. So I would be a little bit more reluctant to comment on that particular instance. I do think that they will be very strong going in, presuming they don't make any roster changes, which why would they?
I can't wait to see Vander Forgive Him versus Neil Smithy. That will be fucking amazing.
It will be quite fun, wouldn't it?
And in best of two. We're not just going to see it in one game and they can do some weird thing. We get to see 2 games. No excuses again. Great. Here's my question. If Spirit just went ham in China, was single-handedly carrying, do you expect him to play like that in a ULCS?
I really hope we see that version of Spirit, right? Because that version of Spirit is an extremely fun and exciting player to watch.
Okay, so another team that's been set is Vitality. Formerly, they bought the Gambit spot and then shed all the players. And so we ended up with this lineup, which was Kabashard top, obviously a former Gambit player, Shook jungle, mid lane is Nukedog, formerly of Roccat. Shook obviously was actually on Copenhagen Wolves towards the end of the split and formerly in the Alliance before that in Elements. And then the bot lane is... Who is the bot lane for that? Oh, that's Kasing and Hyun, the former H2K bot lane.
Stick it together.
First thoughts on the overall... Well, listen, if you're a little spider monkey, you hug close to the mother. We've gone through this already. So anyway, so what do you think of the overall roster?
I think it seems like a pretty decent middle-of-the-pack roster, right? Seems relatively good.
I think it should be good.
Yeah. I mean, I think that given the problem with Europe right now is because of all the players leaving to NA, like, we don't even really know what Element's roster is right now. Like, they don't even have a roster. So we have Origin, Splice has the Dignitas EU roster. Who's on Roccat? Don't know. G2 seems like they're a bit up in the air too. So I think Vitality instantly puts themselves into contention for top 3 in EU just with this roster. I mean, Kabashard was really good last year. I'm not the biggest fan of Shook because I feel like he's so inconsistent, right? That's the thing, is like he can look incredibly good in some games and really struggle in others. So it's not a guarantee that you have whenever he comes into a given roster, right?
I always felt like Shook was overrated.
I think he's overrated.
The way that people
look
would
at
rate
his
him,
peak.
exactly, they would only look at the great game. What they'd do is they'd do that faulty logic of, oh, the other games were just like a mistake happened, and if he could just do that every game, you can't play that game with one player and not others. If we want to play that game, if he could just do that every game, right, I'll take Pawn then. Okay, if Pawn can play his absolute best game every game, he'll be the best player in the world. Problem is he can't do that. Again, another inconsistent player who's prone to just sometimes not turning up and just doing nothing in a game.
Absolutely.
So you can't do that selectively on certain players and not others. I mean, if the same person who thinks that Shook's amazing, like one of the best junglers in the world, also thinks Doublelift is overrated, just don't ever speak to me again, because the same logic should apply, right? Doublelift at his best is freaking awesome. He's an amazing player, sick laner, always does really well in his good games. In the games he doesn't, yeah, he has his problems at times. So with what I try to do with all players is I actually try to always take advantage. I'll give people a bit of insight. Because especially in League of Legends, I don't have time to watch every game, because I'm also trying to be the expert in CSGO and know the most about that game. So I actually have to give up some of my League of Legends time. But the reason I can still watch enough games is because I have a system of how I watch it, where I only watch VODs. I never watch games live.
Yeah, that's actually an incredible waste of time.
So it allows me to check the scores, see if the game was even worth watching, read people's comments, see what people say. So I not only know what game I'm watching, if it's good, but then I know where in the game the interesting things happen. I know which players to watch. I know, for example, if a guy's got 0 kills and he's going to end up dominating, he's going to get those kills somewhere. I can already be thinking in advance, how could he get them? What will happen? So I'm almost breaking the game down as I watch it the first time. So what I also do for players, if I want to get a sense of a player, I'll purposely go and watch like 3 games where he dominates, 3 games where he does average, 3 games where he does badly, and I'll try to draw a line through it and go, what were the similarities between, which were the outliers, I'll ignore them, and what was the general trend of how he did well in certain circumstances, and then you'll get a good sense of it. You can't just watch the games where someone did well. Likewise, you can't look at the game where someone did shit and go, well, he's not a terrible player, you know. I think you have to be reasonable if you're going to analyze it that way.
Of course.
So yeah, my biggest concern on this team is actually, it's Shook, because when I think of the way Gambit worked, a lot of what made Kabashard so good in Gambit was that essentially Diamond Prox was committed to perma-feeding top lane.
Yes, and that's a concern about Kabashard as a player too, because he must be very vocal in order to get those ganks. But he's a great top laner. He had a really good season, but like you're saying, a lot of that was, yes, he had a whole hell of a lot of help in that top lane.
And supposedly Diamond Prox just only cared about going top as well. Like, it was his decision as well. He wanted to go. So maybe Shook isn't the case there. Maybe Shook's going to come and help Nuke Duck, or maybe he's going to come bot lane, you know. So that's something to be figured out still. And also, unfortunately, if you remember the famous games where Shook wouldn't do anything, he tended to just disappear into the jungle and power farm if he was like behind on Lee Sin or something. So that's exactly where that's not going to be good for Kabashard in that scenario. So I mean, listen, who knows? Maybe Shook will evolve and shows a new side to himself, but I need to see that before I can put my chips down on him, as it were. The bot lane, it's great that they've got the same synergy. I feel like this is the season where all the AD carry spider monkeys, it's not that they get exposed and that they're all shit, they just turn out to be average or above average as I thought they always were.
Fair.
I don't think
too early.
I don't think Kianan will be one of the best AD carries in EU this year.
I think he's really, like, he's a decent player, right?
To me, Kianan is a poor man's Reckless.
That's fair.
And by the way, for any moron who doesn't understand metaphors, poor man's doesn't mean he is rubbish. It means he's like a slightly worse version of Reckless, who's a very good player as a clean-up AD carry.
Yeah. And
obviously, Kianan has Kising. That helps you. Certainly, that's really good. There's also the question you have to ask as well. What will the synergy be like between Shook and Kising? That's an interesting factor. Maybe that's an area it can be better, because Nif was a different type of support player than Kasing is. There can potentially be more playmaking there. That could be interesting. I think Nukeduck, I'm so glad Nukeduck at least has a good team. Because here's the thing. He wasn't one of the best mid laners, but he also wasn't one of the worst. Like, he was above average, certainly. And he would have games where he was very good. He'd have games where he was okay as well. I actually thought the last year was pretty decent overall when you added up all the games together.
Yeah, I think Nukeduck still has some issues. He must have some issues on stage or something like that, because it's a little disconcerting to see or hear about how his practice performance is not necessarily as good as his on-stage performance. So hopefully he can get over that. Maybe the new teammates will work out in that way.
Till the end of LCS, even at the end, everyone I asked who plays against him in solo queue said, no, in solo queue he is insane. Like, in solo queue he should be one of the best mid laners in the entire West. So yeah, there was clearly some translation issue going on there. And also, in playoff games, that Roccat team obviously was choking because they didn't get past fucking Unicorns of Love, and then they didn't make it out the gauntlet either when they had chances in both of those series to potentially win, and they didn't manage it either time. So, new team, new look on things. They brought the Gambit coach, that Sean's guy, so we'll see what he does. Interestingly enough, that might help Kabashard, because supposedly the Sean's coach guy actually also bought into this philosophy that Kabashard was the main carry and they were going to feed Kabashard, and that's why Forgiven kind of got left out there playing the Sivers and the... What else did he even play at that point in time? God knows what. And not Callista, that's for sure. We just know that much. So, okay, there's Vitality team. I'm thinking Vitality, if things go well, 4th best team maybe. Otherwise, middle of the table. That's what I'm thinking at the moment. Like, low playoff team.
Really? Like, who would you put above them besides H2K?
Origin. Okay,
H2K, Fnatic, and Origin? All right, fair enough. But they're still contending for top 4. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's not bad. And obviously, if Fnatic goes to shit, they can maybe be 3rd best. I mean, obviously, we don't really know, so they could be better than that. But I'm just saying in terms of what I see on the roster, I think that's reasonable. Sort of 4th to 6th, I'm thinking, for that team.
Yeah, and we're still waiting for other rosters in Europe, right? We're not even seeing a Roccat roster or an Elements roster right now. Like, that's pretty disconcerting. Justice is no longer on G2.
That makes me wonder if those rosters will just be filled with...
Smitty J went to Team Dignitas, so they only have Kikis, Perks, and Hybrid right now. What's going on there? That
makes me wonder if those rosters will get filled up by challenger players, which in its own way could be cool, because then you might get players that we didn't know were really good, or whether it will be like a bunch of the old guys. Like, for example, will we see Candy Panda back? Will we see Freddy back, in teams? Because these are players where, yeah, they might have had the best seasons, but they were always reliable to a degree. Like, Candy Panda especially is probably one of the most unduly shit-on players ever. He's always been at least average, even in the bad periods. He knew his game, Yeah. Serviceable player, certainly. So, okay, another lineup. This is going to be an NA one now. So, over in NA, we have the Immortals lineup. Now, here we go. This is where Huni and Rainover went over. It turns out Huni did not become an AD carry. He's going to be the top laner with Rainover in Immortals. Pobalt a mid laner. Wild Turtle and Adrian bot lane. Now, here's the thing, Monty. A lot of people are hyped about this lineup. A lot of people look at this and they go, hey, what a cool lineup. Oh, what a potential. I'm going to tell you straight up, Monty. My first feelings are, there's some players in this team I've been fairly critical of in the past, and I don't know if they're going to necessarily do anything more this time around. So what are your first thoughts on the whole roster?
I think Adrian's a good pickup. Now, they have to have 3 NA players, right? So who would you take besides Wild Turtle? He's got a lot of experience, competitive experience. And in terms of NA80 carries, what are you going to take? Like Keith McGrief, Chaox? Like, I think it's a good pickup.
The ultimate heel turn. Bring Chaox back.
I think picking up Huni and Rainover with the established synergy that they have is quite good. I don't know if you I think they did a very good job of creating a good roster based on the constrictions of the environment of the NALCS.
Okay, I've got a question for you. So you're saying who could they have picked up?
Sure.
Well, they originally, in the previous team, which was Team 8, had Nian Tonso AD carry.
Possible. They could take that route again, for sure.
I think that would have been an interesting pickup. The rest of them I'm fine with. Like, obviously I think Adrian's a good player. I think people have overrated him a bit. Like, that's one of those ones where for some reason people always do it. If you're a good supportive player, people are like, no, that is not enough. I must say you are a star player as well. Like, come on, man. Everyone's not a star player, are they? Like, so that's the whole point of star player. They stand out amongst other players. He's a good supportive player. Okay, it's not going to set the world alight, and I'm actually glad he didn't go to TSM. Fixed with Wild Turtle, I can see some issues here. Every player who plays a Wild Turtle you better be able to control him or work with him in some way, or that could get really out of hand. That's a concern I have for this team, Wild Turtle.
Might be a problem.
Remember, in TSM, they were literally telling him stuff like, don't flash in. In fact, don't use flash. Like, don't ever Valkyrie in. Always Valkyrie back. It's a bad sign when you're having to tell players stuff like rules that they can't ever do. I'll give you an example, okay? There was an example in Counter-Strike, like over a decade ago. It was around like 2004. And there was this famous team made, which was a transatlantic team, where what they did is they took these European players, Norwegians, 3 Norwegian players, and they mixed them with 2 North American players who were like the star players. And they had this support network of really good European team players around 2 star players. One was a guy called Shagwar, who was an AWPer, he was a very good AWPer. And the other guy was a guy called Method, who was a really good rifler, extremely good aim. But what happened was the European in-game leader played with Method for a couple of weeks. And the thing with Method was he was in no sense an intelligent person, and as a result he wasn't a cerebral player either. So in the game, the in-game leader quickly found out, like, what the hell is this guy doing? Because he used to buy grenades and accidentally throw them into his teammates, as in when they were rushing into sites. And so eventually he had to just ban him from using grenades. And by the way, this wasn't a crap team. This team won a championship, a major. But they had to ban a player in their team from using grenades. Every other player in Counter-Strike's allowed to use grenades. So for me, Wild Turtle is that player. He's the Method of League of Legends in that sense. Except that they haven't won a World Champ. I guess they won IEM World Champ. So I guess they did in a sense. They made it work. So my question here is, how do they make it work in Immortals? That's an unproven thing.
Right. But they're still, I think, more or less. I think Pobelter has been having better showings, and we'll see if he continues to improve. But for the most part, like, you have to look at this and say, okay, well, who's the carry on this team besides Huni, right? Pobelter playing a lot of Lulu, Wild Turtle, unreliable. Like, Huni is that big carry force. They don't have that much depth.
This is all in on Huni. So what about Pobelter? Did you think that CLG were justified removing him?
I thought Huni did not put in a good performance at IEM San Jose. Whether that's going to be reflective of his performance in the regular season, I don't know. But on first blush, it doesn't seem like it. And Pobelter has had some decent performances. Remember, in the finals against TSM, he played Victor all 3 games, and those were very successful.
Yep, certainly. What do you think of the idea of taking Huni and Rain over and putting them on another team? Obviously, without Yellowstone, without Daylor. So, what do you have? Could there be any problems? Are you positive about this change?
I think it should work. Huni's English has gotten extremely good, actually, over the course of his time on Fnatic, and it seems like he's going to be very comfortable in this environment. You don't really have to worry about language issues, especially when the nuances can be translated by Rainover. So I think keeping them together and retaining that synergy is quite a good idea.
Who is the coach of Immortals? Is that the one where... who
Dylan.
is the coach? The guy who was the TSM analyst who was on our show?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe that can help with Wild Turtle then?
Yeah, strong working relationship, obviously. Whether or not Dylan is ready to be a head coach, I don't know. We'll have to see how that goes with him. But
let me think. Have you seen any of the interviews with the guy who's the CEO of Immortals? This guy called Noah Winston, I think.
Yes, I know Noah, yes.
I actually have been quite impressed by his interviews. He's actually considering
he's very well spoken.
So here's the thing, Monty. With his age, I would have expected, if you didn't know anything about him, you to be skeptical of him, because you were of the guy who was the Gravity owner, who was just some young, like, trust fund type guy who had a team, just bought a team basically. But it seems like for someone young and for someone who's dropped out of college, I know that might be a trigger for you, Monty. Young, dropped out of college, you're already not like this. Get your life back on track, young man. There'll be time to own a team in the future. You need life experience. Anyway, so with that considered, I think he seems like he's got a good head on his shoulders. Actually, he seemed like he knew what he was talking about. And
from knowing him personally, I think he's quite competent for his age. I think he's clever. So he's well spoken. He wants what's best for the players and for the team. I think he is a good pickup. I think he's an anomaly in that regard, actually.
I'm always looking for edges, Monty. Little bits of detail, bits of dirt, little bit of background on someone. Not to just use initially, but to have in my back pocket. So if I ever need that little edge, or I need a piece of info to throw out there, it's there waiting for me. Like that gun that you put under the back of your shirt, down your jeans, so no one knows it's there. But if anything goes down, You're always prepared. As an American, I had to make that analogy. I don't know what that's like at all. Actually, I've never seen a gun. I used one of those guns from Tekken 1. No, what was it? What was the game
From
that had
Tekken?
it? No, what was the Namco game that was you? What was it called? The one where you pressed a pedal to hide and then you dodged back out.
Time Crisis.
Time Crisis. That's it. I used that gun, and even then, it didn't feel right holding that gun in my hand. You could fire that gun, though, like a gangster. You could fire it sideways and still hit, so I appreciated that. There wasn't any kickback that wrecked my muscles. But I don't know what guns are all about. But anyway, that's distracting me from the point. The point is, I did a little bit of digging. And so when I found out this guy dropped out of his university, Northwestern, by the way, good university in America, Ivy League, I believe. So
it's not
no. Well, it's that sort of scale, right?
Yeah,
isn't it comparable?
It's up there.
Whatever. So anyway, I don't even know what Ivy League means, mate. So anyway, something to do with Ivy, I don't know. Anyway, continuing on, I saw that when he was doing this thing, I Googled him, and I Googled his university, and I found out that he actually was the head of some sort of like student body and had been involved in debate and speaking classes. So then I Googled further. I started Googling him, debate, and his university, and apparently when he was at his university, he was involved in bringing forward a kind of protest that the student body did to get the University of Northwestern to divest themselves from 6 companies that are in some way alleged by these group involved in like keep holding down Palestine in the Palestine-Israel conflict or something, or doing something that they considered unethical to them. And so they actually successfully got the university, exerted pressure on them to pull out of this. Now, here's where it gets interesting. So that's already interesting, Monty. He's coming into this, maybe he's an altruistic person, maybe he has core values he wants to set in place. That's interesting itself. But the funny part for me was I scrolled down on the news website where I read this, and all the comments went like this. There would be comments from guys called like Alviv or like mega obviously Jewish sounding names, right? All those people were like, these people are scum, how dare they are promoting genocide, and plus they are scum. Then there would be posts from people whose name would be like Alziz or something, who'd be like, this is a wonderful thing these people have done, they did a great job. And so what was great was, this is totally irrelevant to League of Legends, by the way, I set it up just to explain that it's got head and shoulders in it, but I just found it amazing how utterly inane the comments were, even on a political thing, Monty. It's not just Reddit that's bad. Humanity's bad, Monty. I hope you know that. I hope you know I didn't come to some sort of conclusion that people on Reddit in esports are bad. I've been a misanthrope since I was about 8, and I realised that people are shit. So that's just a conclusion I came to.
I'm really glad to hear about your continuing perseverance and that.
Here's the thing, though. Shit. I'm not biased. Like, I actually do every now and then. I sit down and I say, you know what? Give people a chance. Every now and then you let people in. One guy turns out to be all right. Something that you didn't try turns out to be not so bad, You get to let him in every now and then. But you know what? I've been burned a lot of time when I've done that. Everyone was telling me about this movie, Twilight. Oh, it's so fun. It's so great. It's a love story. But a lot of people were biased against it. I thought, you know what? Give it a chance. I watched it. And I watched it, and I wanted to unwatch it. I wanted to delete it from my brain and to somehow never have to experience that. I remember there was a scene in it where the vampire guy tells the girl to jump on his back and goes like, hold on, you little spider monkey, which actually, ironically, fits back into the whole Yarn and Kasing thing. Maybe unknowingly, I took the analogy from Twilight. Maybe that's the one good thing, creatively and artistically, in terms of expression, that ever came out of that movie. I made a good analogy about Yarn and Kasing. Secondly, likewise, I will also watch Star Wars, even though I'm pretty sure it will be crap.
Man.
And I think that Star Wars has nothing to do with the movie Star Wars. I think Star Wars is actually a sort of unresolved childhood immaturity of people who are like, I loved it when I was 6. Yeah, what other things could you say that about when you are 6, mate? What cartoon that you watched when you were 6 would you tell someone as an adult? No, I think it's really good. G.I. Joe is fucking amazing. Like, you'd look like a cretin, but somehow, a bit like religion, we just tolerate these people because we know we're not supposed to speak out against Star Wars. I'm speaking out. There was 2 good Star Wars movies.
Yep.
There were Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. The first one was okay, and then the prequels are shit. They were only good in the context of, oh, these got a bit better as they went on. Oh, that ending was a bit crap. That's it. They weren't good. And the last good Star Wars movie was made in 1983 or something. Get at me, you nerds.
I totally agree with you. And I've been complaining on Twitter about it. I'm skeptical, very skeptical about the new movie for the reasons you said. There have been very few actually good Star Wars movies, and I'm sick of the Hollywood process of mining these IPs to death instead of creating new and interesting new properties, because the original trilogy is quite good. Like you said, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's a good story. Like I said, I thought the first one is pretty good. I think Empire Strikes Back is great, and then Return of the Jedi was pretty good too. But I'm sick of like people basically being apologists for Star Wars as a franchise, and who the fuck wants 15 more Star Wars movies? Because they're just we already have like 4 scheduled before 2020, and they're just gonna keep on making shitty spin-offs, and this is where they're gonna put all their money instead of actually being inventive.
So here's my real problem on it. I'll describe it like this. If people who liked these Star Wars movies just did it like this, listen, it's my guilty pleasure. Like I've told you before, Monty, I think I might have said it on the show before. I like Limp Bizkit. I also like prog rock music, which is incredibly technical studio musicians, and I don't in any way pretend Limp Bizkit is that. And I don't know, Limp Bizkit artistically are incredible. I just think that they're good as a guilty pleasure, okay? I like them in a certain mood to listen to, maybe if I'm drinking, okay? So I enjoy that, or in other ways intoxicated. So that's when I enjoy Limp Bizkit. That's when I feel like I'm on the right wavelength for them, you know? When the sunsets have been, well, a long and systemic derangement of the senses. Rimbaud actually maybe would enjoy Limp Bizkit as well, Monty. That's what I'm saying there. So I don't think he would. He'd actually be disgusted by it. But anyway, so I like that. But I don't pretend it's really good. People who like Star Wars legitimately pretend these movies are like, oh, you know they're going to make a sequel to Heat. But like that, well, if that would be great, mate. But they're like, yeah, you know they're making a 7th Star Wars movie. Really, mate? And you're going to tell me that's wicked, are you? But have you noticed, though, the point I'm making, there is some weird social stigma where, because so many people say it's cool and say it's awesome, even people who don't like it often just stay a bit silent. And it's like religion. They just don't touch the topic, and they go, oh, yeah, Star Wars, yeah, I hope it's good, yeah. Is Han Solo in it, an actor who hasn't been good for about 25 years? Brilliant, yeah, because we all love fucking Harrison Ford's movies now. I hope, in fact, you know what, Star Wars fans? I hope this movie's as good as the 4th Indiana Jones movie. Suck a dick, there you go. I hope it's exactly as good as the 4th Indiana Jones movie.
You know what? I have never seen that movie because I waited, unlike everybody else, for reviews to come out, and then I realized it was going to be terrible, and so I just intentionally never watched it, so it couldn't ruin my love of Indiana Jones.
Here's the thing, though. That movie spawned a South Park episode that was brilliant.
Oh,
That was one of the most edgy, but I mean, I can't believe they got away with showing, like, someone actually just getting like ass raped on screen, and it was literally just like, yeah, it's a cartoon, but it's a cartoon of George Lucas and fucking Steven Spielberg. What the fuck is that? Like, that's so fucked. And it was that line they had at the end to tie it all back in, Monty. You know when they went and arrested like Lucas and Spielberg, and as they're taking them out, they just say, "We found a dead Yoda in the basement," or some mad line like that. Like it's totally unnecessary. Because in many ways, obviously metaphorically, he had raped Yoda in many ways, you know. So I connected it all back again. We got there eventually. So I believe we were talking about Immortals and their CEO Noah Winston. Okay, we're back on. I'm back in the room.
Sidetrack, by the way.
Back in the room. Okay. I mean, he's going to wonder, what did I have to do with Star Wars? Well, maybe you were to blame. So, what do you think the actual chances of this team are? Remember, we've got TSM, we've got Cloud9. Who else is good? That's pretty much the only good ones at the moment, actually, admittedly. Oh, no, there's Energy. There we go. So there's TSM, Cloud9, Energy. There's like 3 good teams aside from them. Are they going to be better than any of those teams?
I think they should be quite strong. I think they're a top 3 contender. They seem like they're quite good on paper, so.
Does the fact that most of the other NA teams haven't completed rosters yet, I mean, CLG in theory haven't, but I suspect they're going to keep most of those players. Does the fact that like Gravity, Impulse, Liquid, we don't know who's playing for these teams? Do you think they're going to be able to get good players?
My team hasn't announced a full roster yet either. So.
Oh yeah, I was just talking about top teams, but we can talk about that too if you want. So. Okay.
Well, I think Liquid has some hard work to do. I think losing Quas was a really big blow to that roster. Yeah. So who they're going to pick up from basically a challenger NA player, because remember, they can't have any more imports. That's going to be really tough, I think, for them to overcome. Gravity and Tip currently don't have rosters at all. So that's a bit disconcerting. They're both for sale, but there hasn't been any announcements about whether or not those teams have been picked up and what those rosters could possibly look like.
And don't forget, as far as I know, I think Zhao Weizhao's ban should be finished for the spring split, unless I'm wrong. Unless it maybe ends during the spring split or something, so maybe he can come back.
Yeah, it could, theoretically.
What about... So, okay, do you have any speculation as to who you think might join any of these teams? Is there anyone you can think of who would be like a fit for them or who's available?
Well, Team Liquid does have, for their top laner, there are a lot of options right now for top laners that they could approach. Some of them include, like, well, they could go for Lorlo or Zig, who's on Team Liquid Academy, or Chris, or who else? I would think those would be some of the more preferable pickups, at least from what I know of the NA Challenger scene. But a little bit hard to say there. I think in terms of the other teams like Gravity and Tip, there are players like Xpecial, as far as I know, isn't contracted to a team right now. So that could be, I would think he's probably going to be pretty valuable to either Gravity or Impulse as an NA support with a lot of experience.
That would be interesting if that Zig guy came, because what people don't know is that guy's mega old school. He was playing like season 2 runs.
Yeah, I remember.
Way back in the day. So that it's not like he would be a total newbie.
Like Flares, maybe, from Enemy. That's another one for top lane.
Who was the guy who... That was it, Enemy, yeah, Flares. Okay, yeah, that was the top lane, right, yeah. Seraph is still around, but he's on... What team's he on? He's still on Team Dragon Knights, yeah.
Yeah,
they're on the Challenger team.
They're Team Arena Online Tau right now, but they've been in Korea practicing, and I don't think he's going to leave. And I think that team has a really strong chance to make it through relegations, because remember, their season was pretty much sunk by the fact that the visa issues that they had prevented them from really debuting their complete roster or practicing with it for the majority of the season. And they were looking pretty good by the end, actually, so...
I've got a question for you. If you don't know any behind-the-scenes info, if you had to guess, what do you think will happen to Froggen?
He'll go to NA.
Do you want to know something? I'm not going to reveal anything. By the way, I haven't spoken to Frog on this, so I'm not getting this for Frog, and therefore I'm not leaking anything, okay?
If I was Gravity or Impulse, I'd be probably gunning for him. That's what I'll say.
Here's the thing. Just on the
or
little
CLG.
things
Honestly, if I was CLG, I'd be going after him too.
Here's the sad thing. All of those would be better than what I've heard might be on the cards for Froggen. So all the people who are like, he's just a really good player, I agree he's a really good player, but I don't think he's going to go to a top team and be in a really good position. Just based on the things I've heard, there's a chance it's going to end up as a sad situation for everyone who wants to play. But it might be in NA, so we'll have to see about that. I'm just teasing people on that. That's my new thing, Monty. I tease people.
You're just a teaser now?
I'm just teasing people. That's what I've got to do. See, I've never actually teased people before. Normally, I just come out not only with what I think, but more than people want to hear me say. Now I'm trying to do the other. I'm trying to leave them wanting more money. I'm trying to build into storylines.
It's an interesting strategy. It's very different than your normal approach. It's true.
Yeah. See? I'm like when Flame, my hero, it's not really my hero, it's just my favourite player, had to learn how to play utility style.
Maybe Flame will come to NA. How do you feel about that?
Kill yourself. No. You know what makes me sad though, Monty? I'll go ahead and out them. I won't say who said it, but I know you're watching now. Fuck everyone who privately messaged me in the Chinese scene who knows a lot about transfers who said, Flame's going to SK Telecom. And I sat there the whole time like, let's wait until it happens. As soon as it happens, I will gloat. I will begin my campaign that will last 1 year until Worlds of shitting on everyone and acting incredibly arrogant. I'm actually going to do that anyway. That's actually, I should have teased you with that one, but that's a spoiler actually. I'm going to do that regardless. But I would have had more justification to do that. I would also have trolled people hardcore. Like, oh, I guess Faker's going to get carried to another Worlds again. Yeah, I'd have done it all, Monty. I had all the shit talking prepared. Sadly, it didn't happen and they got Duke instead. Who, by the way, is a great player. Yes, but the problem is I was told Flame was going to SK Telecom. Think about that, Monty. That means he can win an LCK and he can win Worlds. The two tournaments he hasn't got.
That's true. Well, maybe he'll still go to a team. Maybe he'll go to IEM.
That wouldn't be terrible, I guess.
Well, they already have Chaser and Coco, so...
Yeah, they've got a decent team together there. Do you think he's going to a Korean team?
I have no idea, honestly. He could go to an NA team. Like I said, everything's up in the air as long as Tip and Gravity don't have rosters.
The problem is, I don't think that would even work very well. As in, first of all, you probably definitely need a Korean jungler to work with him.
He also doesn't speak any English, pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. And beyond that, as a player, he's known to be like quite a forceful player who has his own ideas about it. If you can't even speak to anyone, how the fuck are you going to get him on the same page as you?
Might cause problems, for sure.
But no, I actually don't think Flame's going to go to NA. Because the thing is, to me, since he probably could have gone to another Chinese team if he wanted to, if he just wanted to make sick money. So if it's not for money, presumably it's a competition. So you'd think you're going to go to Korea. Whereas the only reason they go to NA is either you get a super sick team, which it doesn't look like there's going to be one for Flame, or you get better money than Europe, but you're not going to get better money than China. So I can't see it. It seems like too much of a weird middle ground to go to NA, not for the money, but also not for the best competition, if you know what I mean.
I agree.
If I'm Flame, you just made all that money from 1 year. Why not just try and win LCK or do as well as you can in LCK's one last run, you know?
Right, and he's still a very high-profile player, so if he wanted to go to a team with IEM, which we apparently has been, they've publicly said that, you know, Longzhu is going to come out and try and pay players a significant amount of money on par with the Chinese, and if they're signing deals with players like Coco and Chaser, they certainly are compensating them well. There's no doubt about that. So if they could come out and try and get Flame, then maybe that would be a very good IM team for the first time ever.
Okay, that's all that. So at the moment, we've still got massive gaps in NA. Do we know yet when you roughly have to say that what your lineup is, or when you have to close the roster, or whatever the fuck all that shit is?
Roster lock is on January 2nd.
That's way too soon, man. How could all these moves happen before then?
I don't know what Tip and Gravity are doing. I'll just say that. Like, I don't know what their situation is. So
I've got one tip for you guys. No pun obviously intended. I've got one tip for all the people who haven't got players yet. Just something that I've learned and that we've all learned the hard way through our experiences with Evil Geniuses and with Team Dragon Knights. Here's my one little tip for you guys. When you go to get the guy's visa processed, pick the fast visa processor. I know it sounds like that's just obvious, intuitive, but some people have fallen down. That's been an intelligence test some people have failed before. Also, don't get a jungler to be your support player who's never chosen to be a support player, doesn't know how to play support, and then eventually just goes back to being a jungler the second he's released to your team. That's another tip. Just another tip for picking up Koreans there. Get actual players who play the positions that you want them in. That's my tip. Okay, so let me see. Is there anyone else we haven't looked at in terms of teams? I mean, it does seem a bit mad, just the sheer amount of LCS teams, EU and NA, who haven't announced rosters.
I do find it odd, too.
Because if you've noticed a trend, by the way, I'll let people in on some info. When people have the player signed, they don't wait for the whole team to be signed or try everything out. They tend to announce the player being signed once he signs his contract, that day or the next day. It's very quickly that the turnaround.
It also depends on, we can remember that Riot has processing for, like, when you acquire a player, you have to submit to Riot the paperwork so that they can do their behavioral checks on that player. So that's why remember Reginald was like fined previously for announcing the player before Riot approved it. So there is some turnaround time there for sure.
But with that said, that probably means most of these teams haven't signed the players. And what's more, that doesn't mean, by the way, another key point, that when a journalist reports they're trying out these players, if they then don't sign, that doesn't mean the journalist was wrong. Don't be that dense to think that doesn't mean they weren't trying them out, but they decided against it. That can also happen, obviously.
Yes.
And if you haven't learned anything, don't believe any team who tells you who they are at signing till they show you the contract. Because they'll all lie, as far as I can tell.
Yes, that is also true.
All liars. Okay. What about your team, Monty? Knowing what you know now, how do you think of Renegade's chances in this NALCS?
I'm not going to talk about that until we announce our full roster.
Oh, that's right, because supposedly there is still a spot that is unknown. I don't know who it could be. I just know he was maining Draven, and his actives were the same as the European AD carry. I think he smurfed well, and in many ways covered his tracks flawlessly. Jesus Christ. Really, guys? We haven't learned that yet.
Dude, Thorin, you do realize if I say anything, I will be fined by Riot.
That's not my concern, really. As long as it's not my Skrilla getting affected, Monty. So I'm just saying, you know. So you're going to have to do a good job of not lying, but just not telling mistruths either. So just
I don't know who it could be. But exactly. if you had any theories, I'd be interested in hearing your opinion.
Yeah. Well, my theory, if it's a Draven main who uses those actives, is that it would be Freeze. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean it's certain to be Freeze, because maybe he doesn't sign, maybe they sign someone else. That's a possibility, but I think it's almost certain that he was at least trying out for the team. And as an outsider, I'd heard perhaps he'd gone to Korea, and that's all I can say about that. Because remember, one thing I do a good job of, Monty, is even if I speculate, people don't realise this, if I speculate on the show, I nearly always do that without private information that I'm not allowed to leak. As in, I do it as though I don't know that information, and I just create a separate entity in my brain that has a limited set of information, then I speak from that. A bit like when the Godhead experiences itself through me in this universe, it has to feel like a limited, isolated individual, whereas actually at all times it could access all knowledge from the Akashic record, which I know you believe in, Monty, and that could happen in many ways.
That's exactly the analogy I would have come up with in that situation.
It's my theory. Okay, so we have an event coming up, which is IEM Cologne, and when this comes out, it'll actually be on the same day. Like, I think this will be released in the morning of when that is in my time, and then it'll be on the same day as when IEM Cologne is. So, first and foremost, what I like about this tournament is, I think this actually might be the best IEM I've ever seen in terms of the LCS era IEMs, because there is no challenger team, there is no wildcard team, there is a Korean team that actually beat SK Telecom and CJ. There's Chaogu Reapers, who for a while were like a top 3 team in China up until the playoffs all went to shit. And then there's Dignitas, H2K and Fnatic from Europe. Okay, H2K and Fnatic considered potential favourites for LCS. Cloud9 from NA, they're considered a potential favourite for NA LCS, or one of the stronger teams. The only one that's potentially weak is the brand new Dignitas team. It's a brand new LCS team, unfortunately, who have to bring Genesis to support. So that's the one downside. Aside from that, I think this is the best field I've seen from an IEM. What do you think?
I think this is a really exciting tournament. I mean, we talked a lot of this about this on By the Numbers, which you can go watch, which is Thorin and my other show for Alpha Draft.
Yep.
But I think it's because of the new patch, we finally have a non-All-Stars sort of non-fun tournament on the preseason patch that it's very exciting to watch. And a lot of these rosters, even though they have very limited amounts of practice together, they look good on paper, and it will be fun to watch them.
So in this scenario, Monty, when we have H2K play C9, this will be very interesting, because obviously in NA, no jungler could stand against Rush. Like, I don't care if everyone tells me Santorin was the best jungler in spring season.
He wasn't.
In as much as he was efficient and the team won, okay, I'll give you that. He wasn't the best individual jungler, though. Rush was always the best jungler in NA. And, I mean, you could just see it in the games. He was phenomenal. His star power was ridiculous. Even when the teams weren't good that he was on, he was still very good. So here's the interesting thing. You put him up against Jankos. What do you think of that matchup?
I think it's a really exciting matchup between very aggressive early game junglers, so I'm super interested in that matchup in particular. I do think that H2K will take this series 2-1. I think both Cloud9 and H2K have been preparing for this event, so it should be a really, really good start to the tournament. But I think that if you look at pound for pound, H2K with Forgiven and Vander is just going to outclass. Like, I don't think Hai has had enough time to be a top tier support against a very lane dominant player like Forgiven.
I also have my concerns in as much as, I mean, we saw when Hai first came back to Cloud9. People forget. It's not that he came back and they instantly started winning and they did well. They actually still did pretty badly when he came back, you know. They only won a few games still, and they had to, like, win a tiebreaker for, like, 7th place or something. So they weren't even that great when he came back. It was only during the gauntlet that they started to get shit together, and his shot calling started to take more of an impact, and they started to do better. So putting him into a new position where he has to deal with more himself individually could also impact his shot calling. And he's playing with a player, Rosh, who's never been under his shot calling before. There's actually, it's not as simple as thinking, well, Cloud9 always figure out a way, highest shot calling's always wicked. Yeah, eventually it is, but your first tournament, I could see that being a problem, and I don't think this is the team you want to play first of all anyway, because this is a team that has power players. And actually, when you think of this team, all the players that are in this lineup here, in theory, have been in teams in the past that their specialty was team fighting. H2K was very good at that. Forgiven's always been a team fight AD carry. The old Rockats, the Season 4 ones, were team fight skirmish teams. So this is a team that wants to team fight, yet that's at the end of Season 5, all that Cloud9 could do was team fight. So I don't think that's... The recipe there isn't all.
I wouldn't say they couldn't even, by the time Worlds rolled around, I wouldn't say they could team fight. I would say that they could siege a turret well. I wouldn't say that their team fighting was spectacular.
So, okay, there's that one. And then in the other matchup, we have Dignitas Xiaogu. Now, unfortunately, even if Dignitas had brought their real lineup, you'd still favour Xiaogu. But then to know they haven't even got their real support player, and they haven't even got a support player, come on, that's like too much of a handicap already.
Yes. Yes, it is. And especially against TNT and TCT, who are, like, TNT's a major carry for Xiaogu. That should be a pretty good advantage, I would think, for QG. I think that's going to be a 2-0 for QG overall. What's
going to be fun about this tournament? Are you ready for me to go full Chinese analyst and anger people, Monty? Yes, it's true. I think HUK is going to win the tournament. So Forgiven could be the superstar of the tournament and could do amazing things. Who knows? Maybe someone on Ever will shock us with how good they are against international competition. Maybe Featherburn will have some sick tournament or Rush. But actually, the guy to watch is TNT, the AD carry of Xiaogu. This is in the summer, I thought he was the best AD carry in China, actually. He's a really good player, and against this field of people who don't know him, if they haven't done their homework, this guy has a potential to be an MVP of the tournament type character.
I mean, possibly. He's been a little inconsistent in the past, so when he has looked good, he's looked very good, but he's also like randomly fed a lot, so I think he'll still do fine at this particular event. I think that Xiaogu is in a good place because they do tend to play around their AD carry pretty well, and this is a big AD carry meta at the moment, so that's a big positive for them, which is another reason why I think it's fun to see players like Forgiven at this tournament. There's also, in terms of MVP, I do think that if Ever repeats their performance at Kespa Cup, then Crazy or Loken are in a really good position to receive sort of an MVP performance as well.
Actually, AD carry is the best position in this tournament in terms of skill.
Yeah,
you got Sneaky, you got Loken from Ever, you got Reckless, you got Forgiven, you got TNT, even Apollo. Like, I don't think Apollo's a good player, but he's a decent player at least.
He's all right.
He's not bad, certainly. So I think that's the best position at the tournament. And the thing with TNT is he might get to play both Reckless and Forgiven because he's on Reckless's side of the bracket, and then we assume he might play Forgiven in the final. So we could get to see a real head-to-head test there. And by the way, just this isn't like hype. If Forgiven gets to play against a Korean AD carry or a Chinese AD carry, he will try to go fucking ham. There's no way he will like play supportive in that game or play, because you have to realize, I'm not exaggerating. In his mind, even in the doldrums of Season 5, when he was in a team that didn't look like they were going to go places and Gambit was figuring shit out, in his mind, Forgiven still believed if he had the right team and the right champions, that he would be able to shit on, like, amazing players. Like, he didn't look at those like, if you ask him in private even, what do you think would actually happen if you went up against, like, Prey and those guys? He'll just say dumb things like, well, I'll tell you what happened when I played them on the solo queue one time and I was shitting on the bot. Like, really, dude? Like, he really thinks that in his mind. Here's the great thing about Forgiven. He's, like, double lift before he got... So, so as is Chowster before he got the confidence beaten out of him. Forgiven is double lift before CLG wore him down to a shadow of himself and then hoard him out to TSM. He's still got that ridiculous arrogance to believe that he's going to wreck everyone and that if it's just a fair game. He literally wants that like stupid meme of like 2v2 bot lane, no ganks, real men only. He actually believes that shit.
I know he does. And he believes very strongly in like win lane win game.
So yeah, I mean, that's why it'll be fun if they go head-to-head in that sense. What about Ever's chances? Okay, here's something. One thing we didn't discuss on the By the Numbers that I wanted you to talk about is, now that you've had a chance to watch Ever's games from the Kesper Cup, give me thoughts on Ever.
I think that Ever came into Kespa Cup really strong, but a lot of the teams were not exactly practicing for that patch or had just gotten back after Worlds and weren't used to playing with, say, Kindred in the game. So not to take away from them, and they did have really strong team and individual performances, and they swept SKT and they swept CJ. But at the same time, I'm not entirely confident in their current powers going in. So I think it'll be an all-European final. I think it'll probably be like Fnatic H2K, but maybe Ever will show up again.
Like, put it this way, everyone who was getting really hyped on the fact they won those series, as it stands right now, this team won't contend for the LCK title, right?
I don't think so, but they also can't, they're not in the league, Duncan.
I mean, presumably one day they would get in if they were good, though.
Yeah, if they could hold on to their players. I mean, with a lot of the shakeups...
I mean, they did fail the promotion with like 2 different players or something, right?
Yeah. But like obviously I think with their current roster, but that's a long time to wait. And are they really going to stay together long enough before the rest of the OGN, or rather Champions teams, try and pick them apart for players that they need to fill out the roster?
I mean, it would be kind of telling if no team picked up any of them. That would suggest actually that maybe the other teams know something we don't, and maybe it was a fluke or something like that.
Sure.
What about the new Fnatic playing in this tournament? Can Fnatic win the tournament?
I think they can, but again, they don't have a lot of time to practice or get together and actually work on a lot of their communication issues, which I think are going to be a major change for them in terms of shot calling without Yellowstar, without Rainover. So I think it's unlikely that they win, but if they can gel absolutely immediately, perhaps. But again, they lost a lot of their shot calling prowess, so I think it'd be really tough.
See, I'm going with Xiaogu to make the final. I think it'll be H2K Xiaogu in the final. I think H2K will win the tournament. So there's my prediction. And I guess in that world, I'll take Forgiven as the MVP. There we go. It all works out in the end, Monty. It all works out in the end. Of course, the saddest final would be if this happens, Monty. First of all, let's not even consider if Dignitas beat Xiaogu. At that point in time, you probably just can't ever call yourself a Chinese analyst ever again. At that point, it's over for you. But let's imagine that Xiaogu at least beat Dignitas. The saddest would be if Cloud9 beats H2K, destroying the H2K hype, then loses to Ever, and then Ever just loses to someone in the final really easily. That would just ruin the whole tournament, basically.
Is that the situation you want?
I mean, it could happen. Ruin the whole fucking tournament, mate. I always think of what the worst case scenario is, Monty, and prepare myself for it. It works. It works as a strategy in life.
Just constant. Just prepare yourself for the worst. Yeah. Therefore, if it's better,
just steal it. Doesn't mean you don't allow the possibility of something good to happen. It's not pessimism. It's just getting ready. That's the kind of way you stoically brace yourself to experience what could happen to you. I think that's the end of the show at this point in time.
It's enough for now.
Yeah, that's thanks to Alpha Draft and all that jazz. I think that's the end. There's nothing else.